Officer faced maximum sentence, until this boy stood up from the jury. The judge's gavel was about to seal the fate of Sergeant Michael Johnson when something unexpected happened. The prosecutor's final words still echoed through the state. Supreme Court in Orlando, Florida, painting the 45-year-old officer as a corrupt man who had abused his position to extort local business owners. Michael felt sweat trickling down his temples as he watched the stern faces of the jurors. After 23 years serving the community, his career and reputation were about to be destroyed by charges he knew were false. But no one believed him. Prosecutor Jennifer Wilson adjusted her glasses and addressed the jury with rehearsed confidence. Her high heels clicked against the cold courtroom floor as she pointed an accusing finger at Michael. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the evidence is clear and irrefutable. The defendant used his badge to intimidate business owners in the downtown area, demanding monthly payments in exchange for protection. We have recordings, testimonies, and documents proving an extortion scheme that lasted over 2 years." Michael lowered his head, feeling the weight of every gaze upon him. His wife Catherine sat in the second row, her eyes red from crying. She held tightly to the hand of their 16-year-old daughter, Emily, who kept nervously shaking her. "Seg?" The defense attorney, Dr. Richard Thompson, a 60-year-old man with graying hair, rose with difficulty. His arguments seemed weak against the prosecution's evidence. Michael knew he was fighting a losing battle. "Ladies and gentlemen, my client is an upstanding man who has dedicated his life to protecting this community. The evidence presented by the prosecution can be interpreted differently, but even Dr. Richard didn't seem to fully believe his own words." Michael noticed the hesitation in his lawyer's voice and felt his stomach twist. In the third row of the audience, a gray-haired woman watched everything with keen attention. Eleanor Miller, 72 years old, had worked as a civil servant for 40 years and knew the ins and outs of the justice system. She held the hand of her grandson, Tommy, a 9-year-old blonde boy who couldn't stop fidgeting in his seat. "Grandma, why is the policeman sad?" Tommy whispered, tugging at Eleanor's sleeve. "Hush, sweetheart. We're in a very serious place," Eleanor replied, trying to keep him still. But Tommy couldn't stay quiet. Something about the situation deeply unsettled him, though he couldn't explain why. His blue eyes fixed on the officer's face, and a strange feeling settled in his chest. Michael looked up, and for a moment, his eyes met the boy's. There was something familiar about that child's face, but he couldn't remember where he'd seen him before. Prosecutor Jennifer continued her presentation, showing photographs and documents to the jury. Each piece of evidence seemed more damning than the last. Michael felt as if he was sinking in quicksand with nothing solid to hold on to. "Here we have testimony from 3 business owners confirming they were approached by the defendant on multiple occasions," Jennifer said, waving a folder full of papers. Mr. Anthony Rivers, owner of Golden Bread Bakery, stated that Sergeant Michael Johnson approached him this past May, demanding $200 a month to ensure his shop wouldn't face inspection issues. Michael closed his eyes, remembering that day perfectly. He had gone into the bakery to buy breakfast for his team, as he had every Wednesday for over 5 years. He briefly spoke with Anthony about neighborhood safety, a routine conversation he always had with local business owners. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. How this conversation had turned into an extortion accusation was beyond his understanding. Michael remembered clearly how Anthony had thanked him for the police presence in the area and commented on feeling safer, knowing there was regular patrol. The second business owner, Charles Miller, who ran a construction supply store, had given an even more devastating testimony. According to the prosecution, Charles claimed Michael threatened to shut him down unless he paid a monthly sum of $300. Michael shook his head in silent denial. He remembered Charles, of course he did. The man had called the police station 3 months earlier, worried about some youths vandalizing his store overnight. Michael had personally increased patrols in the area and managed to catch the culprits red-handed a week later. How a favor had turned into an extortion accusation was a mystery that haunted him day and night since his arrest. The third business owner was Jack Peterson, who owned a pharmacy on the corner of the main street. His testimony spoke of intimidation and psychological pressure. Again, Michael couldn't understand. Jack was the father of one of his informants, a young man who helped him identify suspicious activities in the neighborhood. Their conversations had always been friendly and professional. Dr. Richard Thompson stood to challenge the testimonies, but his voice sounded weak and unconvincing. Michael realized even his own lawyer was starting to doubt his innocence. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, it's important to note there's no direct recording of these alleged threats. All testimonies are based solely on the word of the business owners against my clients. Prosecutor Jennifer smiled with satisfaction. She had prepared her response for exactly this argument. "Counselor, if I may," she said, addressing the judge, "we do have direct evidence." Jennifer signaled to her assistant, who immediately turned on a sound system. The courtroom fell silent as a recording began to play. Michael's voice echoed through the room, clear and unmistakable. "Look, Anthony, you know how things work. You're around here. If you want to keep operating smoothly, without headaches from inspections and all that, we should talk about a monthly contribution. $200 would be a fair amount." Michael felt his blood run cold. It was his voice, without a doubt, but he had never spoken those words. Never in his life had he asked any business owner for money. The officer looked desperately at Dr. Richard, who seemed equally shocked. "This isn't possible," Michael murmured, but his voice was drowned out by the murmurs filling the courtroom. A second recording began to play, this time with Charles Miller. Again, Michael's voice sounded clear and threatening. "Charles, you've got a nice store here. It'd be a shame if something happened to it. For $300 a month, I can guarantee you'll have all the protection you need." Eleanor watched Michael closely and saw the genuine shock and confusion on his face. Having worked decades in public service, she had developed a sharp instinct for spotting lies and truths. Something about Michael told her this man was sincerely surprised. Tommy, beside his grandmother, remained restless. The boy couldn't take his eyes off the police officer and felt a strange sensation that he had seen that man before, under very different circumstances. The third recording was the final blow. Jack Peterson appeared talking to Michael about the pharmacy, and once again, the officer's voice suggested a monthly contribution of $150 to maintain the security of the area. The jury was visibly impressed by the evidence. Michael could see the silent condemnation on the faces around him. His career, his reputation, his family. Everything was being destroyed by recordings he was certain he had never made. Dr. Richard stood up again, this time with more determination, though Michael could sense the barely concealed desperation in his gestures. "Your Honor, I request a technical examination of these recordings. It's possible they have been manipulated or edited." Prosecutor Jennifer couldn't hide a satisfied smile. "Counselor, the recordings have already undergone a complete technical examination. The report is here in the records and confirms the authenticity of the recordings. There was no manipulation or editing of any kind." Michael felt as if the ground was disappearing beneath his feet. How was it possible that fake recordings could pass a technical examination? Someone had orchestrated an elaborate scheme to destroy him, but he had no idea who it could be or what their motivation might be. Catherine, his wife, began to cry silently. Emily, his daughter, hugged her mother and cast a look of deep sadness at her father. Michael felt his heart shatter seeing his family suffering. Judge Mark Anthony Silverstein, a serious 58-year-old man, observed everything with a grave expression. He had known Michael for over 10 years and always regarded him as an honest and dedicated officer, but the evidence presented was too damning to ignore. "Dr. Richard, does your client wish to make any statement before we proceed to closing arguments?" the judge asked. Michael looked at his lawyer, who nodded encouragingly. This was his last chance to try to convince the jury of his innocence. He stood up slowly, his legs trembling. "Members of the jury," Michael began, his voice choked, "I swear on my daughter's life that never in 23 years of service have I asked for a single cent from anyone. These recordings, I don't know how they were made, but I can guarantee I never spoke those words." Some jurors looked at him with sympathy. but Michael could tell most had already made up their minds. The evidence was too strong, too concrete. I've known each of these shopkeepers for years. Anthony sells me coffee every week. Charles thanked me personally when I arrested the vandals attacking his store. Jack is the father of a young man who helps me with community work. Why would they do this to me? Michael paused, trying to control his emotions. I have no way to prove my innocence beyond my word. But I ask you to look at my career, my family, everything I've built over these years. Does it make sense that I would throw it all away for a few dollars? He sat back down, knowing his words probably wouldn't be enough. Dr. Richard gave him an encouraging pat on the shoulder, but Michael could see even his lawyer was losing hope. Prosecutor Jennifer stood for her closing arguments, walking through the courtroom with firm, confident steps. She had built a solid career securing difficult convictions, and this case would be another important victory for her record. Members of the jury, we have before us a classic case of abuse of power and corruption. A man who was supposed to protect the community used his position of authority to extort honest shopkeepers and workers. Jennifer made a dramatic pause, observing each member of the jury. The evidence is clear and irrefutable. We have 3 different victims, 3 consistent testimonies, 3 recordings that prove the threats and extortion attempts. We also have circumstantial evidence showing how the defendant used his police patrol to pressure his victims. Michael closed his eyes, trying to recall any detail that could explain the situation. Who would have an interest in destroying him? Who had enough access to create such convincing recordings with his voice? Furthermore, the prosecutor continued, we have evidence that the defendant deposited cash amounts into his bank account that do not match his police salary. Over the last 6 months, suspicious deposits totaling more than $3,000 have been identified. This information was new to Michael. He had never made such deposits, and his bank account was always in the red by the end of the month. How could there be deposits he knew nothing about? Dr. Richard Thompson stood up immediately. Your Honor, this information is not part of the main case files. I request that the jury disregard it. Counselor, the bank statements were added. Gather the supplemental files and communicated to the defense last week, Jennifer replied calmly. Michael looked at Dr. Thompson, who was desperately flipping through his papers. The lawyer was clearly lost, trying to find documents that should have been in his possession. I found them here, Counselor, Dr. Thompson whispered to Michael. The statements are here, but I swear I hadn't seen them before. Michael examined the papers and felt a chill run down his spine. There were deposits of $200, $300, and $150, exactly the amounts mentioned in the alleged extortions. And the dates matched perfectly with the periods mentioned by the merchants. Someone had planned his downfall with surgical precision. Every detail had been carefully crafted to leave no room for doubt about his guilt. Eleanor, in the audience, watched Michael with growing conviction that something was wrong with the trial. Her experience in public service had taught her to spot inconsistencies and manipulations, and there was something in Michael's reactions that didn't match those of a guilty man. Tommy fidgeted beside his grandmother. The boy felt an urgent need to say something, but he wasn't sure what. A persistent memory hammered in his mind, a recollection that kept trying to surface but remained hazy. Grandma, I think I know that police officer, Tommy whispered for the 3rd time. Shh, sweetheart, let's pay attention to what's happening, Eleanor replied, not giving much weight to her grandson's comment. But something about Tommy's insistence began to catch her attention. The boy didn't usually fixate on things without reason. She looked more closely at Michael and then at her grandson, trying to understand what was going on. Prosecutor Jennifer continued her closing arguments with eloquence and conviction. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, we cannot allow those who swore to protect us to become our predators. The defendant has betrayed not only his badge, but the entire trust society places in law enforcement. Each word felt like a stab to Michael. 23 years of honest service were being reduced to dust by accusations he knew were false. But how could he prove his innocence against such well-constructed evidence? For all these reasons, Jennifer concluded, I request that the defendant be sentenced to the maximum penalty for the crimes of extortion and passive corruption, 12 years in prison and the loss of political rights. A murmur spread through the courtroom. 12 years in prison meant the end of everything for Michael. His career, his family, his life, everything would be destroyed forever. Dr. Richard stood to deliver his closing arguments, but his posture already showed defeat. Michael realized his lawyer had completely lost confidence in the case. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Dr. Richard began, his voice unconvincing, "though the prosecution's evidence is compelling, I ask you to consider the defendant's impeccable record. 23 years of service to this community cannot be ignored." Even Michael knew those words sounded hollow against the weight of evidence against him. Dr. Richard was just going through the motions, having already given up on saving the case. "My client is a family man, a hard-working individual who has dedicated his life to serving this community. Should you decide to convict, I ask you to consider his personal circumstances and his record when determining a more lenient sentence." Dr. Richard sat down, and Michael knew he was alone. Not even his own lawyer believed in his innocence anymore. Judge Mark Anthony gave the jury their final instructions before deliberation. Michael studied each face, searching for any hint of doubt or sympathy, but most jurors avoided his gaze. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you have been chosen to decide the guilt or innocence of the defendant based on the evidence presented. Deliberate with calm and fairness, always remembering the presumption of innocence that protects every citizen." The jury withdrew to deliberate, and Michael was left alone with his thoughts. Catherine and Emily approached, and he embraced his family for what might be the last time as a free man. "Dad, I know you're innocent," Emily said, tears in her eyes. "No matter what happens, I'll always believe in you." "Mike, we'll fight." "To the end," Catherine promised, using the affectionate nickname only she called him. "We'll appeal. We'll find a way to prove your innocence." Michael held his family close, his heart breaking. He knew a second chance was unlikely. The evidence was too well constructed, too convincing. Meanwhile, Eleanor watched the scene with growing unease. Her instincts told her something was fundamentally wrong with this trial. She looked at Tommy, who was still restless, insisting he recognized the officer. "Tommy, where do you think you saw that man?" Eleanor asked, this time paying attention to what her grandson was trying to say. "I don't remember exactly, Grandma, but it was somewhere different. He was helping someone, and he seemed really nice." A thought struck Eleanor. Maybe Tommy had seen Michael in a situation that could help clarify his character. She decided to look deeper into the case details. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they returned to the courtroom, their solemn faces revealed the verdict. Michael's legs nearly gave out, and he braced himself against the table to keep from falling. The jury foreman, an older man with white hair and glasses, stood with a paper in hand. His voice echoed through the silent courtroom. "Your Honor, the jury, by majority vote, finds the defendant Michael Johnson guilty of the charges of extortion and passive corruption brought against him." Catherine let out a cry of despair that echoed through the courtroom. Emily buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. Michael felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. Judge Mark Anthony received the verdict with a grave expression. He had secretly hoped the jury would find reasonable doubt, but the evidence had been too convincing. "In light of the jury's verdict," the judge said solemnly, "I now pronounce the sentence. Michael Johnson, you have been found guilty of the crimes of aggravated extortion and passive corruption. Considering the severity of the crimes and the abuse of public office, I sentence you to 12 years of imprisonment, initially under a closed regime, in addition to the loss of political rights for the duration of the sentence." The judge's words seemed to echo from far away in Michael's ears. 12 years. His life was over. His family was destroyed. All for crimes he had never committed. Dr. Richard stood up mechanically. "Your Honor, I file an appeal and request that the defendant remain free until the appeal is judged." "Denied," the judge replied immediately. "The severity of the crimes and the material evidence indicate a high risk of flight. The defendant will remain in pre-trial detention." Michael looked at his family one last time before being handcuffed by the court officers. Catherine tried to approach but was stopped by the court security. "I love you, Mike. We'll fight for you," Catherine shouted as Michael was led out of the courtroom. It was at that moment that Tommy could no longer hold back. The sight of the officer being taken away in handcuffs awakened a memory that had been buried but now surfaced with crystal clarity. The boy suddenly stood up, knocking over the chair beside him. Eleanor tried to hold him back, but Tommy was faster. "Wait," the boy shouted, running toward the center of the courtroom. "That officer isn't a criminal, he saved me." The entire courtroom stopped to look at the blonde boy in a blue shirt who had interrupted the solemn sentencing. The judge banged his gavel, trying to restore order. "Child, return to your seat immediately," ordered Judge Mark Anthony. But Tommy didn't stop. He planted himself in the middle of the courtroom, arms outstretched, blocking the path of the officers escorting Michael. "He saved me," Tommy repeated, tears streaming down his face. "He was the one who got me out of the car when I was trapped. If he were a criminal, he wouldn't have helped me." Michael stopped walking and looked at the boy. Suddenly, the memory struck him like lightning. 3 months earlier, during a routine patrol, he had found a child locked inside a car parked under the scorching sun. The boy had been desperate, crying and screaming for help. "Tommy?" Michael murmured, finally recognizing the boy. "It's him, Grandma," Tommy shouted, looking at Eleanor. "He's the officer who broke the car window and pulled me out when I couldn't get free." Eleanor stood immediately, her mind racing to process what was happening. If Tommy was telling the truth, this could completely change the perception of Michael's character. The judge banged his gavel again, trying to restore order in the courtroom, which had erupted into murmurs. "Silence, officer! Remove the child from the courtroom at once." But Eleanor stepped forward. "Your Honor, I am the child's grandmother and request permission to speak." "Madam, this is neither the time nor the place," the judge replied, clearly irritated by the interruption. "Please, Your Honor," Eleanor insisted, walking toward the center. "My grandson is trying to report a fact that may be relevant to the case." Prosecutor Jennifer stood immediately. "Your Honor, I object. The trial has concluded, and any new information should have been presented during the proceedings." Dr. Richard, who had lost all hope moments before, saw a spark of possibility reignite. "Your Honor, if there is a witness who can speak to the defendant's character, it should be considered." Michael looked at Tommy with a mix of hope and disbelief. The boy truly remembered him, but would it be enough to change anything at this point? Judge Mark Anthony was in a difficult position. Technically, the trial had concluded, but the child's unexpected intervention had created an unprecedented situation in his 20 years on the bench. "Ma'am," the judge said, addressing Eleanor, "your intervention is irregular, but considering this involves a child, I will allow him to speak briefly. However, I make it clear that this will not alter the verdict already delivered." Eleanor nodded in gratitude and knelt beside Tommy, who was still visibly shaken. "Tell the judge what happened, sweetheart," Eleanor said softly but firmly. Tommy wiped his tears with his shirt sleeve and looked directly at the judge. His voice, though childlike, carried a sincerity that was impossible to ignore. "Your Honor, it was the Saturday before Mother's Day. My mom had gone into the mall and left me in the car because I was too lazy to walk. But then she took too long and the car got really hot." Tommy paused, clearly reliving a traumatic moment. "I tried to open the door, but it was locked. The window wouldn't roll down and I was getting so hot. I started screaming, but no one heard me." Michael remembered that day perfectly. He had been on his routine patrol when he heard a child's cries. At first he thought it was kids playing, but something in the tone of the screams alerted him to the urgency of the situation. "I was getting dizzy and really scared," Tommy continued. "Then I saw this police officer running over. He looked inside the car and saw I was in trouble." The boy pointed directly at Michael. "He grabbed a rock and broke the car window to get me out. Then he gave me water and stayed with me until my mum came back." Eleanor felt her heart race. If this story were true, it could be powerful testimony about Michael's character. "Sweetheart, are you absolutely sure it was this officer?" Eleanor asked, needing absolute certainty. "Yes, Grandma," Tommy replied with conviction. "I remember his face and his voice. He was really kind to me. He said he had a daughter my age and knew how scared I was." Michael felt deep emotion welling in his chest. The boy even remembered their conversation. Emily had indeed been 8 years old at the time. almost the same age as Tommy. Prosecutor Jennifer, who had watched the scene with growing concern, decided to intervene. Your Honor, while we understand the emotion of the moment, a child's testimony about an event allegedly occurring months ago cannot be considered relevant evidence to modify a verdict based on concrete proof. Dr. Richard stood immediately. Objection, Your Honor. The testimony demonstrates the defendant's integrity and is directly related to the psychological profile required to commit the crimes he's accused of. Judge Mark Anthony was in an extremely delicate position. On one hand, the trial had concluded following all legal procedures. On the other, the child's intervention had created a deeply moving human situation that couldn't simply be ignored. Dr. Richard, while the child's testimony is touching, it does not constitute sufficient evidence to overturn a verdict based on concrete technical proof, the judge said, trying to maintain the legally correct stance. Michael felt his last hope fading again. Even with Tommy's testimony, the evidence against him was too solid to be questioned by a single account of his character. But Eleanor wasn't ready to give up. Her years in public service had taught her there was always more than one way to approach a problem. Your Honor, Eleanor said firmly, I request permission to speak as a citizen and former public servant. Ma'am, public demonstrations are not permitted during court proceedings, replied the judge, already impatient with the interruptions. Then I request to speak as a character witness for the defendant, insisted Eleanor. Prosecutor Jennifer stood up again. I object. Witnesses should have been listed during the pre-trial phase. Dr. Richard saw an opportunity. Your Honor, if the lady wishes to testify about the defendant's character, it could be considered for a potential sentence reduction during sentencing deliberations. The judge weighed the lawyer's words. Though he couldn't change the verdict, there was still room to consider new factors for sentencing. Ma'am, while your statement cannot alter the jury's verdict, I will allow you to briefly speak about the defendant's character for sentencing purposes. Eleanor thanked him and positioned herself so the entire court could hear her. Her 72 years of life experience would now serve to try and save a man she believed was innocent. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Eleanor Miller. I worked 40 years as a public servant in this city, and during that time I learned to recognize a person's character. Eleanor paused, studying every face in the courtroom. I've observed this trial from the beginning, and I saw something that deeply troubled me. I saw a man genuinely shocked by the accusations against him. I saw reactions that don't match someone who knew they had committed the crimes they're accused of. Prosecutor Jennifer shook her head dismissively, but Eleanor continued with growing conviction. Furthermore, my grandson's testimony isn't just about the defendant's character. It's about a concrete act of heroism and protection that proves the opposite of what the charges suggest. Michael watched Eleanor with increasing admiration. This woman, whom he didn't even know, was fighting for him with a courage that moved him deeply. A man who smashes a car window to save a child in danger, without knowing her, without asking for anything in return. That is not a man who extorts shopkeepers, Eleanor declared firmly. Some in the courtroom began murmuring, in agreement. Eleanor had touched on a fundamental truth of human nature, the consistency between character and actions. So, while I have no power to challenge the evidence presented, I ask this court to consider the possibility that something is wrong in this case. Investigate further, because an honest man is being unjustly destroyed. Eleanor finished speaking and returned to her seat holding Tommy's hand tightly. The boy looked at her with admiration, realizing his grandmother had fought bravely for the officer who had saved him. Judge Mark Anthony was visibly moved by Eleanor's words, but he knew his legal authority was limited. He couldn't overturn a verdict based on emotion, no matter how sincere. Mrs. Miller, I thank you for your words and will consider your statements about the defendant's character for sentencing, the judge said, seeking a middle ground. Dr. Richard felt a glimmer of hope. Your Honor, I request additional time to investigate the incident described by the child. There may be other witnesses or evidence that could shed light on this case. Prosecutor Jennifer couldn't let the case take this turn. Your Honor, the trial followed all legal procedures. We cannot allow emotional appeals to undermine a verdict based on concrete evidence. Michael watched the legal debate unfold, feeling like a spectator in his own life. That boy and that elderly lady were fighting for him with more determination than his own lawyer had shown throughout the entire trial. The judge carefully considered his options. Though he couldn't change the verdict, he did have the authority to grant a brief postponement of the sentence's execution if there was any indication of new, relevant evidence. Dr. Richard, while I cannot overturn the jury's verdict, I grant you a 72-hour window to present additional evidence related to the incident described by the child. If such evidence proves relevant, it may be considered in a potential case review. It was a small victory, but it was something. Michael felt a spark of hope he hadn't felt in months. Maybe there was still a chance, however slim. Until then, the judge continued, the defendant will remain in custody, but I order him transferred to a special cell, given his status as a former police officer. Michael was led out of the courtroom, but this time with a slightly different feeling. There were people fighting for him, people who believed in his innocence. That gave him the strength not to give up. Catherine and Emily approached Eleanor and Tommy as soon as Michael was taken away. "Mom, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done," Catherine said, tears in her eyes. "You were the only ones who believed in him." "My dear, you were so brave," Eleanor told Tommy, stroking her grandson's hair. "Sometimes children see things more clearly than adults." Emily knelt in front of Tommy. "Thank you for remembering my father. He was always a hero to me, and now you've proven it to everyone." Dr. Richard approached the group, still processing what had happened. In 20 years of practicing law, he had never witnessed anything like it. "Mrs. Eleanor, I need your help," the lawyer said. "We only have 72 hours to find evidence that supports Tommy's version of events. Do you remember any other details about that day?" Eleanor thought carefully. "Doctor, I wasn't there when the incident happened, but Tommy might be able to give us more details, and maybe we can find others who witnessed it." Tommy tugged on his grandmother's sleeve. "Grandma, Mom was at the mall. She got really worried when she saw the broken glass, and there was a lady who filmed everything on her phone." Dr. Richard felt a surge of hope. Footage of the incident would be powerful evidence to demonstrate Michael's character. "Tommy, do you remember that lady's name? Or any other details that could help us find her?" the lawyer asked. "She had long hair and was wearing a yellow shirt," Tommy answered, concentrating hard. "And she said she was going to post it on SocialNet, so Mom could see how the policeman was a hero." Catherine's heart raced. If there really was footage of her husband saving the child, it could change everything. "Doctor, we could search social media," Emily suggested. "If the lady posted the video, it might still be there." Dr. Richard agreed. It was a fragile lead, but it was all they had. "Let's divide the tasks. Mrs. Eleanor, could you try to recall more details with Tommy about that day? I'll start investigating social media and try to locate Tommy's mother to confirm his story." "His mother's name is Sandra," Helena said. "Sandra Adams. She works at a clothing store in the mall." Catherine offered to help. "Doctor, I can go with Mrs. Eleanor to talk to this Sandra. Two mothers will understand each other better." Dr. Richard agreed with the division of tasks. 72 hours was very little time, but it was the only chance they had. Meanwhile, at the police station, where Michael had been taken, the officer was trying to process everything that had happened. Tommy's intervention had been like a ray of light in deep darkness. The officer in charge, Dr. Peter Henry Carter, was a man who had known Michael for many years. He had been shocked by the accusations against his colleague and secretly hoped there had been some mistake in the case. "Michael, do you really remember that boy?" asked the officer, visiting his colleague in the cell. "Perfectly, Peter," Michael replied. "It was in the mall parking lot on a Saturday morning. The child was desperate inside the car, with the doors locked and the windows rolled up. The car was boiling from the heat." Michael closed his eyes, reliving the moment. "I broke the rear window with a rock and pulled the boy out. He was sweating heavily and showing signs of dehydration. I gave him water and waited until his mother came back." "And the mother? How did she react?" Peter asked. "She was terrified when she saw the broken window, but then she was very grateful once she understood what had happened. She said she had gotten distracted shopping and didn't realize how much time had passed." Peter shook his head. "Michael, That's exactly the kind of thing you would do. In 20 years working together, you've always been the first to help anyone in trouble. Michael felt deep emotion hearing his friend's words. Peter, someone set up a very elaborate scheme to destroy me. Those recordings, those testimonies, the bank deposits, everything was crafted to look real. Do you have any idea who could be behind this? Peter asked. Michael had thought a lot about that question over the last few months. I've arrested a lot of people over the years, Peter. Maybe someone who got out of prison and wants revenge. Or maybe someone I unintentionally hurt. I'll see what I can find out, Peter promised. Officially, I can't investigate because the case isn't under my jurisdiction, but I can make some informal inquiries. Meanwhile, Eleanor and Catherine were heading to the mall to try to locate Sandra, Tommy's mother. The boy went with them, eager to help prove the innocence of the officer who had saved him. The store where Sandra worked was on the mall's second floor, in a busy area near the food court. When they arrived, Sandra was helping a customer. "Mom!" Tommy shouted when he saw Sandra behind the counter. Sandra looked surprised at her son. "Tommy, what are you all doing here?" "Mrs. Eleanor, did something happen?" Eleanor waited for Sandra to finish with the customer before explaining the situation. When they finally could talk, she told her everything that had happened in court. "Sandra, I need you to confirm if what Tommy is saying really happened," Eleanor said. Sandra thought for a moment. "Mom, it was a few months ago, right? That day you left Tommy in the car and he almost got sick." "Yes, Mom," Tommy replied. "The officer who saved me was on trial today, and he's innocent." Sandra began recalling the details. "Oh, it was terrible. I got distracted shopping. And when I came back to the car, I saw the rear window was broken. I panicked, thinking someone had tried to steal the car." "And then?" Catherine asked, eager to hear the rest of the story. "Then I saw Tommy outside the car, drinking water the officer had given him. The officer explained he had found Tommy trapped in the car, overheating, and had to break the window to get him out." Sandra paused, clearly emotional at the memory. "I was so grateful. The officer was an angel that day. If he hadn't shown up, Tommy could have gotten really sick." Catherine felt a wave of relief. Sandra's version confirmed exactly what Tommy had said in court. "Sandra, do you remember any details about the police officer? Anything that could help identify him for sure?" asked Eleanor. "He was an older man, in his early 40s, very polite, and kind to Tommy. He said he had a daughter the same age and understood how worried I was." Tommy nodded in agreement. "That's him, Mom. The officer from the court is the same one who saved me." "Sandra," said Catherine, holding the young mother's hands, "would you be willing to give a statement confirming this story? It might be the only chance to save an innocent man." Sandra didn't hesitate. "Of course. If this officer is being wrongly accused, I'll do everything I can to help." Eleanor felt a wave of hope. They now had at least 2 witnesses who could confirm Michael's character, but they still needed more evidence. "Tommy mentioned a young woman who filmed everything," said Eleanor. "Do you remember her?" Sandra thought for a moment. "Oh, yes. A young woman who was passing by and saw what happened. She really did film. Hired with her phone and said she'd post it to show the officer's heroic act. Do you remember any details about her?" asked Catherine. "She was in her early 20s, had long hair and was wearing a yellow blouse. Very friendly. Said she worked at a store here in the mall." Eleanor and Catherine exchanged glances. If they could find this woman and the video, they'd have very strong evidence. "Sandra, can you come with us now to give your statement?" asked Eleanor. "Of course, I'll ask my co-worker to cover for me, and we'll go together." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. Meanwhile, Dr. Richard Thompson was in his office, scouring every social media platform he could find, searching for any video that might show Michael saving a child. It was like looking for a needle in a haystack, but it was their only chance. Emily had volunteered to help with the online search. As a 16-year-old, she was much more skilled with social media than the lawyer. Together, they were combing through posts on SocialNet, PhotoShare, and VideoShare from the time of the incident. "Dr. Thompson, I found a few posts about officers saving people, but none that seem to be my dad," said Emily, frustrated after 2 hours of searching. "Don't give up, Emily. We have to try every possibility," replied the lawyer, though he was starting to lose hope himself. Just then, Dr. Thompson's phone rang. It was Eleanor. "Doctor, we have news," she said excitedly. "We confirmed Tommy's version with his mother, and she remembers the woman who filmed everything." Dr. Thompson felt a wave of relief. "Mrs. Miller, that's wonderful. Did you get any information on how to find this woman?" "We know she works at the mall and was wearing a yellow blouse that day. Sandra, Tommy's mom, thinks she'd recognize her if she saw her again." "Perfect. Come to the office right away. We'll organize our plan of action." When Eleanor, Sandra, and Tommy arrived at the office, Dr. Thompson felt renewed hope. For the first time since the case began, he thought they might find a crack in the evidence against Michael. "Sandra, I need you to tell us everything you remember from that day, down to the smallest details," said the lawyer. Sandra recounted the whole story again, this time with even more details. She remembered that the officer had used a medium-sized rock to break the window, that he had called an ambulance to check on Tommy, and that he had stayed until he was sure the child was okay. "Doctor, what about the ambulance?" asked Catherine. "If they called an ambulance, there must be an official record of the service." Dr. Richard Thompson felt as if a light bulb had gone off in his head. Medical records were official evidence that could corroborate the entire story. "Sandra, do you remember which hospital was called?" asked the lawyer. "It was City Hospital. The paramedic examined Tommy and said he was fine, just a bit dehydrated from the heat." "Emily, I need you to help me investigate the service. Records at City Hospital for that date," said Dr. Richard. "If we get the official record, we'll have concrete evidence." Emily agreed immediately. She was willing to do anything to help her father. "And what about the girl in the video?" asked Eleanor. "We'll have to look for her at the mall," replied Dr. Richard. "Sandra, can you come with us tomorrow morning to try to locate her?" "Of course, and I can ask the other sales clerks for help. Everyone knows each other here at the mall." Dr. Richard organized a schedule for the next 48 hours. They had 2 lines of investigation: finding the official medical records and locating the girl who had filmed the incident. "Everyone, I want to make it clear our chances are still slim," said the lawyer, trying to be realistic. "Even if we find evidence about Michael's character, it doesn't automatically cancel out the prosecution's evidence." Eleanor shook her head. "Doctor, sometimes a small crack is enough to bring down an entire wall. If we can show Michael is the kind of man who saves children, maybe people will start questioning whether he'd really be capable of extorting shopkeepers." Catherine stepped closer to Eleanor and held her hands. "Mrs. Miller, I don't know how to thank you for everything you're doing for us. You don't even know us, yet you're fighting for our family." "My dear," replied Eleanor, her eyes moist, "I worked for 40 years watching injustices happen because people were afraid to get involved. I won't let that happen now. That I can do something." Tommy tugged on Eleanor's blouse. "Grandma, are we really going to help the policeman?" "Yes, sweetheart. We'll do everything in our power." That night, Michael lay in his cell, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything that had happened. Tommy's intervention had given him a hope he thought he'd lost forever. Officer Tommy came to visit him again before leaving. "Michael, you've got people fighting for you out there," said Tommy. "That boy and his grandmother are moving heaven and earth to prove your innocence." "Tommy, I still can't believe this is happening. That boy, he remembered me after all these months. You know what that tells me?" asked Tommy. "That you made a real difference in his life. Kids don't forget who helps them when they're in danger." Michael felt a deep emotion. "I just did what any decent person would do. I saw a child in danger and helped." "Exactly. And that's what separates people like you from the ones actually committing the crimes you've been accused of." Tommy paused. "Michael, unofficially, I'll see what I can find out about who's behind these accusations. Someone went to a lot of trouble to set this up against you. You really think it was a setup?" asked Michael. "I'm absolutely sure. I've known you for 20 years. You're many things, but corrupt isn't one of them." The next morning, the search for evidence began early. Dr. Richard went to City Hospital to locate the service records, while Eleanor, Sandra, and Tommy went to the mall to look for the girl who had filmed the incident. At the hospital, Dr. Michael faced the typical bureaucracy of public institutions. After 2 hours of waiting and several transfers between departments, he finally managed to speak with someone who had access to the records. "Doctor, ambulance records are organized by date and type of incident," the employee explained. "If you have the exact date, I can try to locate it." Dr. Richard provided the date Sandra had indicated and waited anxiously as the employee searched the system. "Here it is," she said after several minutes. "April 15th, minor treated in the parking lot of the Orlando Grand Mall. Reason, possible dehydration after being trapped in a locked vehicle." Dr. Richard felt his heart race. "Is there more information?" "Yes. The service was requested by Sergeant Michael Johnson from the police department. The child was examined, showed mild signs of dehydration but was clinically stable." "Child's name Tommy Adams." "That's him," exclaimed Dr. Richard. "Can you provide me with an official copy of this record?" "Yes, but I'll need a court order or authorization from the child's guardians." Dr. Richard immediately called Eleanor, who was at the mall with Sandra. Within minutes, they obtained the necessary authorization, and Dr. Richard had in his hands an official document that confirmed Tommy's entire story. Meanwhile, at the mall, Eleanor and Sandra went from store to store, searching for the woman who had filmed the incident. After 2 hours of searching, they finally found a sales clerk who remembered the case. "Oh yes, I remember that day," said the sales clerk. "It was Carly from the accessories store on the first floor. She mentioned to me that she'd filmed an officer saving a child." Eleanor felt a surge of hope. "Can you take us to her?" "Of course. Her store is right downstairs." When they arrived at the accessories store, they found Carly organizing merchandise. She was a young woman, about 25, with long hair, exactly as Sandra had described. "Carly, these people would like to talk to you about a video you took a few months ago," explained the sales clerk who had guided them. Carly looked curiously at the group. "A video? What video?" "The one of the officer who saved my son," said Sandra. "You filmed when he broke the car window to get Tommy out," Carly remembered immediately. "Oh yes, it was incredible. The officer was a real hero that day. You're the boy's mom." "Yes," Sandra replied. "Carly, do you still have that video?" "I do. I posted it on my social net at the time. It was one of my most liked posts. Everyone thought the officer's actions were beautiful." Eleanor could barely contain her emotion. "Carly, could you show us that video? It's really important." Carly took out her phone and logged into her social net. After a few minutes of scrolling through her old posts, she found the video. "Here it is," she said, showing the phone screen. The video clearly captured the moment Michael broke the car window with a rock, pulled Tommy out and comforted him. The recording quality was good enough to identify Michael perfectly. "My God," murmured Eleanor, "this is the proof we needed." Sandra began to cry as she watched the moment her son was saved again. Tommy, standing beside her, pointed at the phone screen. "That's him. That's the officer from the courtroom," the boy exclaimed. Carly was confused by the group's emotion. "Hey, did something happen to the officer?" Eleanor quickly explained the situation. "Carly, this officer is being tried for crimes he didn't commit. Your video could be the key to proving his innocence." "Oh my gosh, that's awful," said Carly, genuinely shocked. "Of course I'll help. He was a hero that day." "Carly, can you send us a copy of that video and also come with us to give an official statement?" asked Eleanor. "Of course. I'll even quit my job if I have to. I can't let a good man be punished unfairly." Eleanor immediately called Dr. Richard to share the good news. The lawyer was ecstatic. "Mrs. Miller, this is fantastic. Now we have concrete evidence. The official medical record and a video showing Michael in action saving the child. Doctor, let's meet at your office. Carly will come with us to give her statement." 2 hours later, the whole group was gathered in Dr. Richard's office. The lawyer had transferred Carly's video to his computer and had already prepared a petition to be filed in court. "Everyone, I'll be honest with you," said Dr. Richard. "This evidence is very powerful in demonstrating Michael's character, but technically the trial has already concluded. Our best hope is that the judge accepts this as grounds for a case review." "Doctor, what are the real chances of this working?" asked Catherine. "Slim but possible," the lawyer replied. What we have here is proof that Michael has a character incompatible with the crimes he was accused of. If we can convince the judge that this raises reasonable doubts about the other evidence, we might get a new investigation. Eleanor stood up. Doctor, what if it's not enough to overturn the conviction? Then at least we'll get a significant sentence reduction, and that will buy us time to dig deeper into who's behind these false accusations against Michael. Dr. Richard finished preparing the petition and headed straight to the courthouse to file it. He knew he only had a few hours before the 72-hour deadline granted by the judge expired. At the courthouse, Dr. Richard's petition caused quite a stir. Prosecutor Jennifer was immediately notified about the new evidence and looked visibly worried. Judge Mark Anthony received the petition with genuine interest. Carly's video was particularly striking, showing Michael in a clearly heroic and selfless act. Dr. Thompson, this evidence is truly impressive, said the judge after reviewing the material. However, it speaks to the defendant's character, not directly to the crimes he was accused of. Your Honor, that's exactly the point, replied Dr. Richard. The evidence shows Michael has a pattern of behavior completely incompatible with extortion and corruption. The judge carefully considered the lawyer's words. Dr. Thompson, I'll review this evidence thoroughly. I'm scheduling a special hearing tomorrow at 2 p.m. to hear the new witnesses and examine the evidence presented. Dr. Richard felt a wave of relief and hope. Thank you, Your Honor. We'll be ready. Prosecutor Jennifer requested permission to speak. Your Honor, I object to this special hearing. The trial followed all legal procedures and shouldn't be reopened based on character evidence. Ms. Wilson, your objection is noted, replied the judge. However, given the severity of the sentence and the nature of the new evidence, I believe a more detailed review is in the interest of justice. Dr. Richard left the courthouse with renewed hope. For the first time since the case began, he felt they might actually turn this terrible situation around. When he returned to the office to share the news with the group, everyone was overjoyed. Mrs. Miller, without you and Tommy, Michael would be lost, said Dr. Richard. You've saved an innocent man's life. We haven't won yet, Doctor, replied Eleanor with her practical wisdom. We still have a battle ahead of us. That night, Michael was informed about the special hearing by Officer Peter. For the first time in months, he had a good night's sleep. Peter, I still can't believe this is happening, said Michael. That boy saved me. Michael, you saved him first, Peter replied. Now he's returning the favor. The next day, the courtroom was packed for the special hearing. Eleanor, Tommy, Sandra, and Carly were all present, ready to testify on Michael's behalf. Catherine and Emily arrived early and secured seats in the front row. They wanted to be as close as possible to their husband and father. When Michael entered the courtroom, he immediately searched for the faces of those who had fought for him. When he saw Tommy, the boy waved cheerfully, as if they were old friends. Judge Mark Anthony opened the hearing solemnly. This special hearing has been convened to review new evidence presented by the defense that may be relevant to the case. Dr. Richard stood up. Your Honor, I request that the witnesses Eleanor Miller, Sandra Adams, Tommy Adams, and Carly Sanders be heard, as well as the audio-visual material submitted to the record. The first to testify was Eleanor. She recounted how she had observed Michael throughout the trial and noticed that his reactions did not match those of a guilty man. Your Honor, I worked 40 years in public service and learned to recognize when someone is lying. The defendant showed genuine surprise and shock at the accusations, not the embarrassment of someone caught in the act. Next was Sandra. She described in detail the day Michael saved Tommy, confirming every detail the boy had shared. Your Honor, that officer was an angel that day. If he hadn't shown up, my son could have suffered serious consequences. A man who does that for a stranger's child isn't the kind of man who extorts shopkeepers. Tommy testified next, with the simplicity and honesty typical of a child. He recounted his version of events without hesitation, looking straight at the judge. Your Honor, the officer saved me. He was really nice to me and stayed with me until my mom came back. He's not a bad guy, he's a hero. Finally, Carly gave her testimony and explained the circumstances in which she had filmed the incident. Your Honor, I filmed it because I thought the officer's actions were beautiful. He didn't hesitate for a second to break the car window to save the child. It's the kind of thing that restores your faith in humanity. The most impactful moment came when Carly's video was played in court. The footage clearly showed Michael breaking the car window, carefully pulling Tommy out and comforting the frightened child. Many in the courtroom were moved by the images. It was impossible to reconcile the man in the video with someone capable of extorting innocent shopkeepers. Prosecutor Jennifer tried to downplay the evidence. "Your Honor, while we acknowledge the heroic nature of the act shown in the video, it does not negate the concrete evidence of extortion presented during the trial." Dr. Richards stood for his rebuttal. "Your Honor, the evidence presented demonstrates a pattern of behavior inconsistent with the crimes the defendant is accused of. We request a new investigation into the prosecution's evidence, considering the possibility of manipulation or falsification." Judge Mark Anthony was visibly impressed by the evidence. The video in particular had profoundly affected his perception of the case. "Dr. Richard, although the evidence regarding the defendant's character is impressive, it does not constitute direct proof that the prosecution's evidence is false," said the judge. Dr. Richard felt his heart sink. It seemed that even with all the evidence, it still wouldn't be enough. But the judge continued, "However, considering the severity of the discrepancy between the demonstrated character and the alleged crimes, I order the suspension of the sentence's execution and demand a new thorough investigation of the case." A murmur of relief and joy swept through the courtroom. Michael felt his legs tremble and had to lean on the table to keep from falling. "Furthermore," the judge went on, "I order the defendant to be released on provisional liberty during the new investigation period, which will be conducted by an independent team from Internal Affairs." Catherine shouted with joy, and Emily began to cry with emotion. Eleanor hugged Tommy, who was bouncing with happiness in his chair. "Order!" said the judge, banging the gavel. "The investigation will be conducted with rigor and impartiality. If the prosecution's evidence is confirmed, the sentence will stand. If there are signs of falsification or manipulation, the case will be dismissed." Michael was released that same afternoon. When he walked out of the police station, Eleanor, Tommy, and his entire family were waiting for him. "Mr. Michael," Tommy yelled, running to hug the officer. Michael knelt and embraced the boy who had changed his fate. "Thank you, champ. You saved me just like I saved you." "Now we're friends forever," Tommy said with a smile that could melt any heart. Eleanor approached Michael. "My son, the battle isn't over yet. We have to find out who did this to you." "Mrs. Eleanor, I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for me," Michael said, his voice choked. "You didn't even know me, yet you risked everything to help me." "Michael, I saw your soul through your eyes in that courtroom. I knew something was wrong. And when Tommy told me your story, I was certain we were facing a grave injustice." The Internal Affairs investigation began the following week. Officer Tommy had been assigned to lead the case, which brought Michael great relief. The investigators started by analyzing the recordings that had condemned Michael. A more detailed forensic examination revealed something surprising. Although the recordings were technically authentic, there were subtle signs of digital editing. "Michael, the recordings were made by taking phrases from different conversations. You had and stitching them together to form incriminating statements," Tommy explained. "It's a highly sophisticated technique that requires advanced technical knowledge." "But who would have access to my conversations and the know-how to do this?" Michael asked. "We're looking into it. Someone had access to recordings of your routine conversations with merchants and used editing technology to create the false evidence." The investigation also revealed that the suspicious bank deposits had been made through electronic transfers from ghost accounts, created specifically to frame Michael. "This is a very elaborate scheme," Tommy said. "Someone invested considerable time and money to destroy you." Michael began compiling a list of people who might have a motive to ruin him. The list included criminals he had arrested, people who might benefit from his removal from the force, and even colleagues who might have been envious of his career. Meanwhile, Eleanor and Tommy had become well-known figures in the city. The story of the boy who saved the officer had spread quickly, and many people stopped to greet them on the street. "Grandma, why does everyone want to talk to us?" "Tommy, asked as they walked through downtown. "Because you did something very important, my love. You saved an innocent man and showed that the truth always wins in the end." Eleanor had received several interview requests from local newspapers, but had turned them all down. She didn't want to turn Michael's tragedy into a media spectacle. A week later, the Internal Affairs investigation made an important discovery. Reviewing the access logs for the police station's audio files, they identified that someone had accessed recordings of Michael's conversations with the merchants. "Peter, did we manage to track who accessed the files?" asked Michael, eager for answers. "Yes, and you're going to be shocked," replied Peter, his expression grave. "It was Officer Mark Sanders from your own team." Michael felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. Mark was a young officer who had been transferred to his team a year earlier. Michael had always treated him well, trying to teach him the right values of the profession. "It can't be Mark," Michael said, incredulous. "Why would he do this to me?" "We're investigating, but the evidence is clear. He accessed the audio files 3 days before the first complaints against you were made." Mark's arrest was carried out discreetly the next day. During the interrogation, the young officer initially denied any involvement, but faced with the technical evidence, he eventually confessed. "Why, Mark?" Peter asked during the interrogation. "What did Michael do to you?" Mark hung his head, clearly ashamed. "He didn't do anything. In fact, he was always very good to me." "Then why did you destroy his life?" Mark hesitated for several minutes before answering. "Because someone offered me a lot of money for it, $50,000 to frame Sergeant Michael." Peter felt a wave of anger. "Who offered you that money?" "A man named Roger Martin. He said he had a score to settle with Michael and would pay me well to get him out of the way." The name Roger Martin was familiar to Michael. He had arrested the man 3 years earlier for involvement in a money laundering scheme. Roger had been sentenced to 6 years in prison, but was released early for good behavior after 3. "Mark, do you realize you destroyed an innocent man's life for money?" Peter asked. "I know," Mark replied, tears in his eyes. "I needed the money. My mother is sick and the treatments are very expensive. When Roger approached me, I thought it was just to scare Michael, not to ruin his life." Peter shook his head in disgust. "Mark, you could have asked for help. Michael would have been the first to help with your mother's treatment. Instead, you chose to betray him." Roger Martin was arrested the same day. The man was running a small import business that, according to preliminary investigations, was a front for illegal activities. During his interrogation, Roger showed no remorse. "That cop ruined my life," he said angrily. "Because of him, I lost 3 years of my life in prison. It was only fair that he paid for what he did to me." "Roger, you were arrested because you were committing crimes," Peter reminded him. "Michael was just doing his job." "I don't care. He deserved everything. That happened to him." Roger's confession and the technical evidence were enough to completely overturn the case against Michael. A week later, Judge Mark Anthony Silverstein officially cleared Michael of all charges. At the acquittal hearing, the courtroom was packed once again. Eleanor, Tommy, Sandra, and Carly were all there to witness the conclusion of the story they had helped write. "Michael Johnson," said the judge solemnly, "given the evidence that the charges against you were falsely constructed through evidence tampering and fabrication, I declare you innocent of all crimes you were accused of." The courtroom erupted in applause. Catherine and Emily embraced Michael, who could finally breathe a sigh of relief after months of nightmare. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "I order the immediate initiation of administrative proceedings for your reinstatement to the force, with all rights and back pay." Michael looked at Tommy, who was enthusiastically clapping beside Eleanor. The boy had become much more than a witness. He had become a lifelong friend. After the hearing, the entire group gathered outside the courthouse. Michael approached Eleanor and bowed respectfully. "Mrs. Miller, you saved my life, my family, and my honor. I have no words to thank you." "Michael, you don't need to thank me. I only did what was right. The real hero here is this little boy who had the courage to speak the truth." Michael knelt in front of Tommy. "Champ, you're the bravest boy I know. Thank you for never giving up on me." Mr. Johnson, now you can go back to being a police officer and save other kids like you saved me, Tommy asked. Yes, champ. And every time I help someone, I'll remember you. Carly approached the group. Everyone, I'm thinking of making a documentary about this story. I think people need to know there are still good people willing to fight for justice. Eleanor smiled. Carly, if you make this documentary, make sure the main message is that we all have the power to make a difference. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to speak the truth. Michael was reinstated to the force the following week. His first day back was emotional, with colleagues and superiors welcoming him with applause and support. Officer Tommy made sure to be there for the reception. Michael, welcome back. We've missed you here. Tommy, thank you for never doubting me. Even when the evidence seemed irrefutable, you kept believing in my innocence. Michael, I've known you for 20 years. I knew something was wrong with those accusations. Michael resumed his duties with renewed energy. His experience had taught him the value of true friendship and the importance of never giving up on justice. A month later, Michael hosted a barbecue at his home to thank everyone who had fought for him. Eleanor, Tommy, Sandra, Carly, Dr. Richard and their families were all present. Everyone, Michael said, raising a glass of soda, I'd like to toast to all of you who taught me that there are still people willing to fight for what's right. Everyone raised their glasses and Tommy shouted, Long live the heroes! No, champ, Michael replied, smiling. Long live friendship and truth. Eleanor watched the scene with deep satisfaction. At 72, she had discovered she could still make a difference in the world. Tommy, she said to her grandson, do you remember what I always say about doing what's right? I do, Grandma. You say doing what's right is sometimes hard, but it's always worth it. Exactly, my love, and you proved that to everyone. Dr. Richard approached Michael. Michael, can I make a suggestion? Of course, Doctor. You should sue Roger and Mark for emotional distress. What they did to you and your family was terrible. Michael thought for a moment. Doctor, I don't want to waste any more energy on that. I'd rather spend my time helping people like I always have. You're right. That's exactly the attitude of a man of integrity. Catherine approached her husband and hugged him. Mike, I'm so proud of you. Even after all we've been through, you're still the same good man you've always been. Catherine, this experience has taught me that we must cherish every moment with the people we love, and that we should always fight for the truth, no matter how hard it is. Emily joined her parents' embrace. Dad, you're my hero. Not just because you're a police officer, but because you're a good person. Michael felt a deep emotion. His family had endured a terrible ordeal, but had emerged stronger and more united. A few months later, Michael received an unexpected call. It was from Officer Mark, calling from prison. Sergeant Michael, I know I don't deserve it, but I'd like to ask for your forgiveness. Michael stayed silent for a few seconds. Mark, what you did was terrible. You nearly destroyed my life and my family. I know, Sergeant. I can't undo what I did, but I wanted you to know how deeply I regret it. You were always good to me, and I betrayed you in the worst way possible. Michael took a deep breath. Mark, I forgive you. I hope you learn from your mistakes and become a better person. Thank you, Sergeant. When I get out of prison, I'll dedicate my life to making up for the harm I've caused. After the call, Michael reflected on forgiveness. Eleanor had taught him that holding on to bitterness only poisons the heart. It was better to forgive and move forward. A year after the trial, Michael was promoted to lieutenant in recognition of his service and the dignified way he had faced adversity. At the promotion ceremony, Eleanor, Tommy, and the whole family were present. The police chief made sure to mention the importance of integrity and truth in law enforcement. Lieutenant Michael Johnson represents the best of our department, the chief said, a man who never lost faith in justice, even when wronged. After the ceremony, Tommy, now 10 years old, approached Michael. Mr. Michael, when I grow up, I want to be a police officer just like you. Champ, you can be whatever you want, but always remember to do what's right, even when it's hard. I'll remember, Mr. Michael, and I'll tell everyone the story of how we saved you. Eleanor smiled as she listened to her grandson. Tommy's right, Michael. This story needs to be told to show that the truth always wins in the end. Michael looked around and saw all the people who had fought for him. Eleanor, the wise woman who recognized the injustice. Tommy, the brave child who spoke the truth. Sandra, the grateful mother who confirmed the story. Carly, the young woman who preserved the crucial evidence. Dr. Richard, the lawyer who never gave up. You know, Michael said, this experience taught me that we're never alone in this world. There are always people willing to fight for what's right. We just need to have faith and never give up on the truth. Catherine hugged her husband. Mike, you've taught me that a man of integrity can weather any storm and come out stronger. And you've taught me that true love can endure any trial, Michael replied. Dr. Richard approached to say goodbye. Michael, it was an honor to represent you. This was the most important victory of my career. Doctor, thank you for believing in me even when I was losing hope. Eleanor watched the whole scene with deep satisfaction. At 73, she had learned that it's never too late to make a difference in someone's life. Tommy, she said to her grandson, today you learned a very important lesson about courage and truth. I did, Grandma. I learned that when we see someone being treated unfairly, we have to help. Exactly, my love, and I've learned that sometimes children see things more clearly than adults. Michael knelt beside Tommy one last time on that special day. Champ, thank you for saving me. You proved that one brave boy can change the world. Mr. Johnson, I only told the truth. Grandma says the truth is always the right thing to do. Your grandmother is a very wise woman, and you are a very special boy. Michael stood up and looked at Eleanor. Mrs. Miller, you taught me that we should never lose faith in humanity. There will always be good people willing to fight for justice. Michael, you taught me that there are still honorable men in this world. It was an honor to meet you and help you. When everyone said their goodbyes and left, Michael stayed at home with Catherine and Emily. They sat in the backyard watching the stars. Dad, said Emily, do you think this story will have a happily ever after? Sweetheart, life isn't a fairy tale. There will always be challenges and hardships. But I've learned that when we have good people by our side and never lose faith, in the truth we can overcome anything. And what did you learn from all this? Asked Catherine. Michael thought carefully before answering. I learned that our reputation can be attacked. Our freedom can be threatened. But our integrity can only be lost if we willingly give it away. I learned that the truth may take time to come out, but it always does. And I learned that we are never alone when we do what's right. What about Tommy? Asked Emily. Tommy taught me that sometimes God sends angels in the form of children to save us in our darkest moments. He taught me that gratitude and courage have no age limit. Catherine held her husband's hand. Mike, I'm proud of you for forgiving Mark. That shows who you really are. Catherine, holding on to bitterness would be like letting them keep destroying me. I'd rather use my energy to build something good. That night, Michael slept better than he had in over a year. For the first time since the nightmare began, he felt completely at peace. The next day, Michael returned to work with renewed energy. His first call was to help an elderly woman who had gotten lost downtown. Don't worry, ma'am, said Michael, assisting her. I'll help you find your family. As he helped the woman, Michael remembered Eleanor and how an older person had changed his life. He realized that every person he helped was a chance to make a difference, just as Eleanor had done for him. A week later, Michael received a letter from Tommy. The boy had written an essay at school about his favorite hero and had chosen Michael. In the essay, Tommy wrote, "My hero is Officer Johnson, who saved me when I was trapped in the car. But he's not just a hero because he saved me. He's a hero because he never gave up doing what was right, even when everyone thought he was a bad guy. My grandma says people like that are rare and special." Michael read the essay several times, tears in his eyes. He kept the letter in a special drawer, along with other important mementos from his life. 6 months later, Michael was invited to give a talk at a school about ethics and integrity. When he arrived, he was surprised to find out it was Tommy's school. "Mr. Johnson," Tommy shouted when he saw him in the schoolyard, "you came to speak at my school." "Hey, champ, what? A surprise to see you here. I told everyone in my class about you. They can't wait to meet my hero friend." During the talk, Michael shared his story with the students, emphasizing the importance of truth, courage, and friendship. "Kids," Michael said, "I want you to remember one thing. Doing what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it. And sometimes one small person can make a very big difference in the world." A girl raised her hand. "Officer, what would you do if someone said bad things about you that weren't true?" "Excellent question," replied Michael. "First, I would try to calmly explain the truth. If that didn't work, I'd seek out people who know me well to help prove the truth. And I would never, ever give up fighting for what's right." Tommy raised his hand. "Mr. Johnson, tell them how Grandma helped you." Michael smiled. "Tommy's grandma taught me that there are always good people willing to help when they see injustice. She didn't even know me, but she had the courage to fight for the truth." After the talk, Michael and Tommy walked together across the schoolyard. "Mr. Johnson, my teacher said our story is an example of how people can change the world." "Your teacher is right, champ. You completely changed my world. And you changed mine too. Now I know I should always tell the truth, even when I'm scared." Michael knelt beside Tommy. "Champ, you're already a man of character at 10 years old. I'm sure you'll grow into an amazing person." "Mr. Johnson, can I ask you something?" "Of course, champ." "Do you still feel sad when you remember what happened?" Michael thought carefully. "Sometimes I do, yes. But then I think of you, your grandma, all the good people I met because of this situation. And I realize that in the end it was all worth it." "Why?" "Because I learned who my true friends are. Because I met incredible people like you and your grandma. And because now I can help others going through similar situations." Tommy grinned. "So something good came from something bad?" Michael laughed. "You're very sharp, champ, exactly that. Sometimes the bad things teach us very important lessons." When Michael got home that afternoon, he told Catherine about his visit to Tommy's school. "Mike, do you realize how your story is inspiring others?" Catherine said. "Catherine, I think our mission now is to show people that it's always worth fighting for the truth, that there's always hope even in the toughest situations." Emily, now in her second year of high school, joined the conversation. "Dad, I told your story to my friends at school. They were all amazed by Mrs. Miller's and Tommy's courage." "What did they say?" Michael asked. "That it's important to always help when we see someone being treated unfairly. And that age doesn't matter when it comes to doing what's right." Michael felt a surge of pride. His experience was teaching important values to the next generation. A year later, Eleanor invited Michael and his family to Tommy's 11th birthday party. The celebration was at Eleanor's house, with family and friends in attendance. During the party, Eleanor gave an emotional speech. "Everyone," she said, "2 years ago my grandson taught me a very important lesson. He showed me that we should never ignore our conscience when it tells us something is wrong." She looked at Tommy fondly. "Tommy, you taught me that courage has no age, that a child can be braver than many adults." "Grandma, you taught me that we should always help people," Tommy replied. Michael stood to speak. "Mrs. Miller, Tommy, you didn't just save my life. You saved my faith in humanity. You proved there are still people willing to fight for justice." Catherine also wanted to share. "Mrs. Miller, you've become like a second mother to me. In the hardest moments when I thought all was lost, you gave me hope." Carly, who was also there, showed everyone the documentary she had made about the story. The 15-minute video covered the entire journey, from the trial to Michael's exoneration. "Everyone," Carly said, "this documentary has already been seen by over 100,000 people online. Your story is inspiring people across the United States." Dr. Richard Thompson, who was also at the party, approached Michael Johnson. "Michael, I've received 3 more cases similar to yours, innocent people being wrongly accused. Can I use your story as an example that it's possible to overturn these situations?" "Of course, Doctor. If our experience can help others, I'd be very happy." Sandra Adams joined the group. "Hey, did you know Tommy wrote a book?" "A book?" asked Michael, surprised. Tommy turned red with embarrassment. "It's not a real book, just a story I wrote at school about our adventure." "Can I see it?" Michael asked. Tommy brought out a small notebook where he had handwritten the story of how he saved the police officer. The title was How a Boy Saved a Hero. Michael read the story aloud to everyone. Tommy's narrative was simple but moving, told from the perspective of a child who saw injustice and decided to act. "Champ, this story is wonderful," said Michael. "You have a talent for writing." "Mr. Johnson, can I write more stories? About you?" "Of course, but remember to always write about the importance of doing what's right." Eleanor Miller watched the whole scene with deep satisfaction. At 74, she had discovered she could still make a difference in the world and inspire new generations. "Tommy," she said to her grandson, "you've become an example for other children. You show that all of us, no matter our age, can fight for justice." "Grandma, do you think other kids will be as brave as I was?" "I'm sure of it. Sweetheart, your story will inspire many children to always tell the truth." When the party ended and everyone left, Michael stayed behind for a few minutes alone with Eleanor and Tommy. "Mrs. Miller," Michael said, "I want you to know you've changed my life forever. Not only did you save me from prison, but you taught me valuable lessons about friendship, courage, and faith. Michael, you changed our lives too. Tommy learned that his actions can have very important consequences. And I learned it's never too late to make a difference." "Mr. Johnson," Tommy asked, "are you going to be a police officer forever?" "For now, yes, champ. But I know now that my mission goes beyond catching criminals. It's also about teaching important values and helping innocent people who are going through tough times." "And when you retire?" Michael smiled. "When I retire, I'll write a book telling our story, so others will know it's always worth fighting for the truth." "Can I help write it?" Tommy asked excitedly. "Of course you can, champ. After all, you're the hero of the story." 2 years later, Michael received a special honor from the department for his exemplary work and how he had faced adversity. At the ceremony, Eleanor and Tommy sat in the front row. The police chief gave an emotional speech about integrity and perseverance. "Sergeant Michael Johnson represents the best of our department," said the chief, "a man who never lost faith in justice, even when he was wrongly accused. But I also want to highlight," the chief continued, "the people who fought for him. Mrs. Eleanor Miller and her grandson, Peter Henry, taught us that justice is everyone's responsibility." Eleanor was invited to the stage to receive a special honor. She was emotional but maintained her characteristic dignity. "Gentlemen," Eleanor said into the microphone, "I've learned we can't be passive bystanders when we see injustice. We all have a responsibility to act when our conscience tells us something is wrong." Tommy, now 13, was also invited to the stage. "Tommy," the chief said, "you taught us that courage has no age, that a child can make a difference in the world when they speak the truth." "Thank you," said Tommy, a little shy. "I just said what I saw. Grandma always taught me that lying is wrong." Michael watched from the stage, tears in his eyes. Those two people had changed his life forever and were now being honored by the entire department. After the ceremony, Michael, Eleanor, and Tommy posed for photos that would be kept forever as a memento of that special day. "Mr. Michael," said Tommy, "when I grow up, I'm going to work so other innocent people don't go through what you did." "How do you want to do that, champ?" "I want to be a lawyer, to defend innocent people like Dr. Richard defended you." Michael smiled. "I'm sure you'll be an excellent lawyer, champ." Eleanor watched her grandson with pride. "Tommy, you learned early that our mission in life is to help others." "I did, Grandma. And I learned that doing the right thing is always worth it, even when it's hard." 5 years later, Michael retired from the police after 30 years of service. At his retirement party, Eleanor and Tommy were there, along with everyone who had been part of his journey. "Everyone," Michael said in his farewell speech, "I want to thank all of you who supported me over the years, especially during the hardest times when my faith in justice was tested." Michael looked at Eleanor and Tommy. "Mrs. Eleanor and Tommy taught me that we're never alone when we do what's right, that there are always good people willing to fight for the truth." "And now?" someone in the crowd asked. "What will you do in retirement?" "I'll write a book telling our story," Michael replied, "so others know it's always worth fighting for the truth, and I'll give talks on ethics and integrity, especially to young people." Tommy, now 18 and about to start law school, stood up. "Mr. Michael, can I say a few words?" "Of course, champ." Tommy stepped up to the microphone. "Everyone, when I was 9, I saw a man being judged unfairly. My grandmother taught me It was our responsibility to help him. Today, 9 years later, I can say that decision changed my life forever. I learned that one person can make a difference, that the truth always wins in the end, and that true friendship knows no age. Tommy looked at Michael. Mr. Michael, thank you for saving me that day in the car. But mostly thank you for teaching me that a man of integrity never loses his dignity, no matter what happens. Michael was deeply moved. The boy he had saved had grown into a young man of exemplary character. Eleanor, now 79, also wanted to speak. Everyone, she said, her voice still firm. At 79, I can say the greatest lesson of my life came from my grandson. He taught me we should never ignore our conscience when it tells us something is wrong. Michael, Eleanor continued, you've become like a son to me. Your integrity and perseverance are an example to us all. Dr. Richard, now retired, was also there. Michael, defending you was the most important victory of my career, not just because we proved your innocence, but because we showed that the truth always wins in the end. Carly, who had become a respected journalist, joined the group. Everyone, the documentary I made about you has been seen by over 1 million people. Your story keeps inspiring people across the United States. Sandra, Tommy's mother, also spoke. Michael, thank you for saving my son that day, but mostly thank you for teaching us that we must always fight for what's right. Catherine and Emily, now a psychology graduate, watched the entire scene with deep emotion. Mike, said Catherine, I'm proud of the man you've become. Your integrity has taught us valuable lessons about character and perseverance. Dad, said Emily, you taught me that our reputation may be attacked, but our integrity can only be lost if we willingly surrender it. Michael looked around and saw all the people who had been part of his journey, people who had fought for him, believed in him, and supported him in the toughest moments. Everyone, Michael said, his voice trembling. You've taught me that life isn't about what happens to us, but how we respond to what happens. You've shown me there's always hope when we do what's right. When the celebration ended, Michael stayed alone for a few minutes with Eleanor and Tommy. Mrs. Eleanor Tommy, Michael said, you saved my life 9 years ago. But you keep saving my life every day by reminding me of what truly matters. Michael, Eleanor replied, you saved our lives too. You taught us that fighting for justice is always worth it. Mr. Michael, Tommy said, when I graduate from law school, I want to work defending innocent people, so others won't go through what you did. Champ, I'm sure you'll be an extraordinary lawyer, but always remember, no matter what profession you choose, the most important thing is always doing what's right. I'll remember, Mr. Michael. Grandma taught me that since I was little. Michael hugged the two people who had changed his life forever. Eleanor, the wise woman who recognized injustice. Tommy, the brave child who spoke the truth. You know, Michael said, when I was younger, I thought being a hero meant arresting criminals and saving people from physical danger. Now I know being a hero is much simpler. It's having the courage to do what's right even when it's hard. And you are a hero, Mr. Michael, Tommy said, not just because you saved me, but because you never gave up doing what's right. The three of us are heroes, Eleanor said, each in our own way, each at our own age. We've proven anyone can make a difference when they have the courage to act. Michael said goodbye to Eleanor and Tommy, knowing that even though his police career had ended, his life's mission was just beginning. He would dedicate his retirement years to teaching the values they had reinforced in him: courage, truth, integrity, and faith in justice. A month later, Michael began writing his book. The title would be When a Boy Saved a Cop, a True Story of Courage, Truth, and Friendship. Tommy helped on weekends, contributing his unique perspective as someone who had lived the story since childhood. Mr. Michael, Tommy said during one of their writing sessions, do you think our story will inspire others? I'm sure of it, champ. Our story shows there's always hope, that truth wins in the end, and that we're never alone when we do what's right. And what do you want people to learn from our story? Michael thought carefully. I want people to learn that we all have the power to make a difference. That age doesn't matter when it comes to doing what's right, and that true friendship can come from the most unexpected places. Mr. Michael, can I ask you something? Of course, champ. If you could go back in time and stop all this from happening, would you? Michael was surprised by the depth of Tommy's question. You know what, champ? I don't think I would, because if none of this had happened, I'd never have met you and your grandmother. I'd never have learned the important lessons I did, and I'd never have discovered how many good people there are in the world. So something good came out of something bad? Michael smiled, remembering a similar conversation years earlier. Exactly, champ. Sometimes bad things lead us to wonderful discoveries. 6 months later, Michael's book was published and became a bestseller. The money raised was used to create a social project, offering free legal support to innocent people who had been wrongfully accused. Eleanor, now 80 years old, remained active and involved in the project. Tommy, in his second year of law school, interned there during his breaks. Mr. Johnson, Tommy said during a visit, our project has already helped 15 innocent people prove their innocence. That's wonderful, champ. We're turning our bad experience into something good for others. Grandma says that's the best way to give meaning to suffering, by turning it into help for others. Michael agreed. Eleanor was still a source of wisdom for all of them. 10 years after Michael's acquittal, Eleanor passed away in her sleep at 84. Her funeral was one of the largest the city had ever seen, with hundreds paying tribute to the woman who had dedicated her life to helping others. Michael gave the eulogy. Eleanor Miller was much more than a friend. She was a teacher of life who showed us it's never too late to make a difference. She taught us that true courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to do what's right in spite of it. Tommy, now a licensed attorney working exclusively on cases for innocent people, also spoke at the funeral. My grandmother taught me that our mission in life is to leave the world a little better than we found it. She fulfilled that mission flawlessly, touching the lives of hundreds over her 84 years. After the funeral, Michael and Tommy walked together through the cemetery. Mr. Johnson, Grandma always said death isn't the end but a transformation. That good people live on through the lessons they leave behind. Your grandmother was right, champ. Eleanor will keep living through everything she taught us, and through the project we built, she'll keep saving innocent people. Mr. Johnson, can I tell you a secret? Of course, champ. Right before she passed, Grandma told me that saving you was the most important thing she ever did. Not just because she saved an innocent man, but because she showed us we all have the power to make a difference. Michael was deeply moved. Champ, your grandmother saved far more than my life. She saved my faith in humanity and taught me the true meaning of friendship. 5 years later, Michael, now 65, received an unexpected call from the current police chief. Michael, we have a case just like what happened to you, an honest officer being wrongfully accused. Can you help? Michael didn't hesitate. Of course, Chief, I can come in today. Tommy, now 28 and a respected lawyer, offered to go with him. Mr. Johnson, let's handle this together. Like Grandma always said, when we see injustice, we have a responsibility to act. Michael smiled. Tommy had become the upright man Eleanor always knew he would be. Champ, let's show this officer he's not alone, that there are always people willing to fight for the truth. As they headed to the police station to review the case, Michael reflected on his journey. 15 years ago, he'd been saved by a brave boy and a wise woman. Now, it was his turn to be the rescuer for another innocent person. Mr. Johnson, Tommy said on the way, do you realize how our story keeps repeating, how we keep saving people? I do, champ, I really do. Eleanor was right. When we do good, good multiplies. Our experience continues to save people. Through the project, the book, and the examples we set, and through ourselves as we've learned to always fight for justice. Michael looked at Tommy with pride. The 9-year-old boy who had saved his life had grown into a man of exemplary character, dedicated to helping innocent people. You know what, champ? Michael said. I think this is our life's mission, to use our experience to help others going through similar situations. I agree, Mr. Michael. Grandma always said every experience, good or bad, prepares us to help someone in the future. When they arrived at the police station, Michael and Tommy encountered a situation eerily similar to what Michael had faced 15 years earlier. An honest officer was being accused of crimes he didn't commit, with seemingly irrefutable evidence against him. Sergeant Mark, Michael said, greeting the accused officer, I'm Michael Johnson. I went through something very similar 15 years ago. Michael Johnson, Mark replied, surprised. I know your story. I read your book. How did you prove your innocence? With a lot of fight, a lot of faith, and the help of special people, Michael answered, glancing at Tommy. And now we're here to help you. Tommy introduced himself. Sergeant Mark, I'm Tommy, the one who helped save Michael when I was a kid. Now I'm a lawyer and I want to represent you. Mark was moved. You really came to help me, but you don't even know me. Mark, Michael said, Eleanor, the woman who saved me, taught me that when we see injustice, we have a responsibility to act. It doesn't matter if we know the person or not. Michael and Tommy spent the next few weeks investigating Mark's case. They uncovered a scheme similar to the one used against Michael, falsified evidence, manipulated testimonies, and a former criminal seeking revenge. Mr. Michael, Tommy said during the investigation, it's incredible how criminals use the same methods to destroy honest officers. It's true, champ, but now we have the experience to spot these schemes quickly. 3 months later, Mark was acquitted of all charges. At the hearing, Michael and Tommy were present, along with Mark's family. Michael, Tommy, Mark said after being cleared, you saved my life, my family, my career. How can I thank you? Mark, Michael replied, you can thank me the same way I give thanks, by helping others who face similar situations. And always, doing what's right no matter how hard it is, Tommy added. Mark pledged to join the project Michael and Tommy had created, helping other wrongfully accused officers. That evening, Michael and Tommy had dinner together to celebrate another victory for justice. Mr. Michael, Tommy said, Grandma would be proud to see how our story keeps saving people. She would, champ, and she'd be especially proud of the honorable man you've become. Mr. Michael, can I confess something? Of course, champ. Sometimes I feel like Grandma is still here guiding me, like she's still teaching us through the challenges we face. Michael smiled. Champ, I think you're right. Eleanor lives on through the values she taught us, and with every person we help, she keeps making a difference in the world. 10. Years later, Michael, now 75, decided to step back from active work in the project. Tommy, 38, had become the lead coordinator. Champ, Michael said, it's time for me to pass the torch to you. You've learned everything I could teach. Mr. Johnson, I can take over the project, but I'll always need your advice. You and Grandma taught me everything I know about courage and justice. Michael was moved. Champ, you've exceeded all my expectations. You've not only become an excellent lawyer, but a man of exemplary character. I learned from the best teachers, Mr. Johnson, you and Grandma. On the day of the project leadership transition ceremony, Michael gave an emotional speech. Everyone, he said, 25 years ago, when I was about to be wrongfully convicted, a 9-year-old boy had the courage to stand up and speak the truth. Today, that boy has become a man who saved over 100 innocent people. Michael looked at Tommy with pride. Tommy taught me that courage has no age, that a child can change the world by speaking the truth. And today he's still changing the world, now as an adult dedicated to justice. Tommy was moved by Michael's words. Mr. Johnson, everything I am, I owe to you and my grandmother. You taught me that our mission in life is to leave the world better than we found it. And you're fulfilling that mission flawlessly, champ. 2 years later, Michael received a call from Tommy with extraordinary news. Mr. Johnson, you're going to be a grandfather. Michael was overjoyed. Champ, what wonderful news. How's Patricia? She's doing great, and we've already decided. If it's a boy, we'll name him Michael Eleanor. If it's a girl, Eleanor Michelle. Michael was deeply touched. Champ, there's no greater honor you could give me. Mr. Johnson, you and Grandma are the most important people in my life. It's only right that my children carry your names. 9 months later, Eleanor Michelle was born. A beautiful girl who inherited her father's blue eyes and the family's determination. Michael, now 78, became a loving and devoted grandfather. He told Eleanor Michelle the same. Stories about courage and truth that he'd once told Tommy. Grandpa Michael, Eleanor Michelle said at 5 years old, can you tell me again the story of how Daddy saved you? Of course, Princess. Once upon a time, there was a very brave boy who saw an injustice and decided to speak the truth. And so the story of Michael, Eleanor, and Tommy continued to be told to new generations. teaching that all of us, no matter our age, have the power to make a difference when we have the courage to do what's right. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. 2 years after Eleanor Michelle's birth, Michael received a call that would change his life once again. It was from the mayor of Orlando. "Michael, I'd like to talk to you about a very special project," the mayor said. "We're creating a support center for victims of judicial errors. We want you to be the coordinator." Michael was surprised. "Mr. Mayor, I'm already 78. I'm not sure I have the energy for such a big project." "Michael, your experience is exactly what we need. And we know you have the best possible partner, Tommy." Michael discussed the proposal with Tommy. The young lawyer was excited by the possibility. "Mr. Johnson, imagine how many people we could help with the city's support. We'd have resources, structure, a full team." "You're right, champ. But I want you to be the official coordinator. I can just be an advisor." "No, Mr. Johnson, we do this together or not at all. You're the heart of this project." Michael was moved by Tommy's loyalty. After nearly 3 decades of friendship, the young man still treated him with the same affection and respect as when he was a child. "All right, champ. Let's take on this challenge together." The Eleanor Miller Center for Victims of Injustice was inaugurated 6 months later in an emotional ceremony attended by hundreds of people, including all the families Michael and Tommy had helped over the years. "Everyone," Michael said in his opening speech, "this center bears Eleanor Miller's name because she taught us never to be passive bystanders in the face of injustice. Today, we formalize that lesson in an institution that will help hundreds of people." Tommy also spoke, holding Eleanor Michelle, now 2 years old, in his arms. "This center is the result of a seed planted 30 years ago by a wise woman and a courageous child," he said. "My grandmother Eleanor always said good deeds multiply. This center proves she was right." Even as a little girl, Eleanor Michelle seemed to understand the importance of the moment. She clapped along with the crowd, drawing emotional smiles from everyone present. In its first 6 months of operation, the Eleanor Miller Center assisted over 200 people. 50 cases were successfully resolved, leading to the acquittal of innocent individuals or significant reductions in unjust sentences. "Mr. Johnson," Tommy said during an evaluation meeting, "we're making a difference on a scale Grandma could never have imagined." "Champ, Eleanor knew exactly what she was doing when she decided to help us in that courtroom. She planted a seed that keeps growing and bearing fruit." Despite his advanced age, Michael worked at the center 3 times a week. His personal experience was invaluable in comforting and guiding desperate individuals who came seeking help. One day, a 50-year-old woman arrived at the center in despair. Her 25-year-old son had been accused of a crime he didn't commit, and she had nowhere else to turn. "Please," she said, tears in her eyes, "my son is innocent, but no one believes him. The evidence seems overwhelming." Michael was immediately reminded of his own ordeal. "Ma'am, what's your name?" "Mary Grace." "Mrs. Grace, please sit down. Let me tell you a story that might give you hope." Michael shared his own story with Mary Grace, from the initial accusation to his final acquittal. She listened with growing attention. "You really went through all that?" she asked, astonished. "I did, Mrs. Grace. And if I could prove my innocence, your son can too. Tommy, can you come here?" Tommy approached and was introduced to Mary Grace as the boy who had saved Michael. "Mrs. Grace," Tommy said, "when I was 9, I saw an innocent man wrongly convicted. I found the courage to speak the truth and changed his fate. Now the 2 of us will help change your son's fate." Mary Grace began to cry, but this time with relief. "You'll really help me." "We will," Michael replied. "That's exactly what this center is for." The case of Mary Grace's son turned out to be complex, but not impossible. Just like in Michael's case, there was falsified evidence and manipulated testimonies. The center's team worked for 6 months until they finally proved the young man's innocence. "Mr. Johnson, Tommy," Mary Grace said on the day of her son's acquittal, "you saved my family. How can I ever thank you?" "Mrs. Grace," Michael answered, You can thank us by helping other families going through the same ordeal. The cycle of kindness must continue. You can count on me for anything, Mary Grace promised. 2 years later, she became a volunteer at the center, welcoming other desperate mothers in need of support. "Mr. Johnson," she said during a volunteers' meeting, "now I understand what you meant about the cycle of kindness. I'm passing forward the help I received." "Mrs. Grace, that's exactly what Eleanor taught us, that good deeds multiply when we share them." That year, the Eleanor Miller Center received a special visit. The state Supreme Court had decided to create a partnership program with the center to identify potential judicial errors. Judge Mark Anthony Silverstein, who had presided over Michael's trial 32 years earlier, was now the Chief Justice. He made sure to visit the center personally. "Michael," the judge said, emotional upon reuniting with his former defendant, "when I presided over your trial, I never imagined that story would turn into something so grand." "Judge Silverstein," Michael replied, "you were crucial to our story. Your decision to grant a second chance was what allowed the truth to come out. Michael, I learned so much from your case. I learned that we must always be open to the possibility that evidence, no matter how convincing it seems, can be wrong." Tommy stepped forward to greet the judge. "Judge Silverstein, do you remember me?" The judge studied Tommy carefully. "My God, you're the boy who stood up in court." "Yes, Your Honor. Now I'm a lawyer and co-direct this center with Michael." Judge Silverstein was visibly moved. "Tommy, you've become an extraordinary man. Eleanor would be proud." "Thank you, Your Honor. Grandma always said we should use our experiences to help others." The partnership with the state Supreme Court allowed the Eleanor Miller Center to expand its work significantly. Now they had direct access to court records and could identify potential injustices even before people sought help. Michael, despite being 80, remained active and engaged. His memory stayed sharp, and his passion for justice unshaken. "Mr. Johnson," Tommy said during a walk in the park, "sometimes I wonder what Grandma would say if she saw all this. Champ, I think she'd say we're fulfilling our mission, that we're turning a bad experience into something good for so many people." "And what about Eleanor Michelle? What would Grandma think of her?" Michael smiled, thinking of his adoptive granddaughter, now 4 years old and already showing signs of the same determination as the rest of the family. "Champ, Eleanor would adore that little girl, and I'm sure she'll grow up with the same values you learned." Eleanor Michelle, who was walking with them, ran up to Michael. "Grandpa Michael, why do you always talk about Grandma Eleanor? I wish I could have met her." Michael knelt beside the girl. "Sweetheart, you do know Grandma Eleanor. She lives in all of us through the values she taught us." "What values, Grandpa?" "The courage to speak the truth, the kindness to help others, and faith that justice always wins in the end." "Do I have those values too?" "You do, sweetheart. You inherited the best values of our family." Eleanor Michelle smiled and hugged Michael. "When I grow up, I'm going to work at the center too. I'm sure you'll do even greater things, sweetheart." 3 years later, Michael began feeling the effects of old age. At 83, his mind was still clear, but his body was showing signs of weariness. Tommy noticed the changes and suggested Michael reduce his workload at the center. "Mr. Johnson, you've already done more than anyone could ask. It's time to rest a little." "Champ, I still have energy to help people. I can't stop now." "Mr. Johnson, you don't have to stop completely. You can stay on as an advisor, but let the younger team handle the heavier tasks." Michael reflected on Tommy's words. Maybe it was really time to take a step back and let the new generations take the lead. "All right, champ. But I want to keep helping at least one person a week, so I don't lose touch with those who need help." "Deal, Mr. Michael. One person. Say a week is perfect." Michael started working just 2 mornings a week at the center, but his influence remained crucial. His personal experience and wisdom were unique resources that inspired the whole team. Eleanor Michelle, now 7 years old, often visited the center with her father. She had become the official mascot, bringing joy and energy to the emotionally charged environment. "Grandpa Michael," Eleanor Michelle said during one visit, "why do people look sad when they come here?" "Sweetheart, They're sad because they're going through tough times. But they leave here with hope because they know we'll help them. Can I help too? Of course you can, sweetheart. Your smile already helps so much. It shows people there's always a reason to hope. Eleanor Michelle became a regular presence at the center, greeting people as they arrived and giving them drawings she made just for them. One day, an elderly woman came to the center seeking help for her grandson, who had been wrongly accused of theft. When she saw Eleanor Michelle, the woman was moved. "What a beautiful girl," she said. "She reminds me of my granddaughter when she was little." Eleanor Michelle walked up to the woman and handed her a drawing. "This is a lucky butterfly. It will bring you good things." The woman teared up and hugged Eleanor Michelle. "Thank you, sweetheart. You've brightened my day." Michael watched the scene with deep emotion. The third generation of the family was beginning to follow in Eleanor and Tommy's footsteps. "Sweetheart," Michael said to Eleanor Michelle after the woman left, "you did something very beautiful. You gave hope to someone who was sad. I learned from you and Daddy, Grandpa. You always help people. And now you're helping too, sweetheart." 2 years later, the Eleanor Miller Center celebrated its 10th anniversary. The ceremony was a grand event, attended by officials, beneficiaries, and supporters. Michael, now 85, gave the keynote speech. "Everyone," he said, his voice still strong. 45 years ago, I was a desperate police officer, about to be convicted for crimes I didn't commit. Today, I'm a fulfilled man who helped create an institution that has saved over 1,000 innocent people." The audience applauded, moved. Michael had become a living legend in the city. "But I want to make one thing clear," he continued. "None of this would have been possible without two special people. Eleanor Miller, who taught me we must never ignore injustice, and Tommy, who had the courage to speak the truth when he was just a child." Tommy was moved by Michael's words. "Mr. Michael, everything we are today is because of your example of integrity and perseverance. No, champ, we owe it to Eleanor's example. She taught us we all have the power to make a difference." Eleanor Michelle, now 9, also wanted to speak at the ceremony. "Everyone," she said with surprising maturity. "My Grandpa Michael and my dad taught me our family has a special mission to help people who are being treated unfairly. When I grow up, I'll keep that mission going." The audience was touched by the girl's words. It was clear the fourth generation was ready to carry on Eleanor's legacy. After the ceremony, Michael received a special honor from the city council. He was declared an honorary citizen of Orlando for his service to the community. "Michael Johnson," said the city council president, "you've turned a personal traumatic experience into hope for hundreds of families. You're an example of how adversity can become strength to help others." Michael accepted the honor with his characteristic humility. "Council members, this recognition isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who fought alongside me. Eleanor Miller, Tommy, Dr. Richard, Carly, Sandra, and so many others who believed in the truth. And future generations," added Tommy, "who will keep fighting for justice." Eleanor Michelle applauded enthusiastically from the audience. She was proud to be part of such a special family. 6 months after the ceremony, Michael received news that moved him deeply. The state government had decided to make the Eleanor Miller Center a model for the entire state, creating similar centers in other cities. "Mr. Johnson," said Tommy, excited by the news, "imagine how many people we can help with centers across the state. Champ, Eleanor would be proud to know her idea is spreading to help even more people. And the best part, they want you to be the lead consultant for the statewide project." Michael considered the proposal. At 85, it would be a big challenge, but also a unique opportunity to multiply the impact of his work. "Champ, I accept, but on one condition. You'll be the project's general coordinator. I'll just be the advisor." "Mr. Johnson, we'll do this together like we always have." "No, champ. It's time for you to take the official lead. You're ready, and you have my full trust." Tommy was moved by Michael's faith in him. "Mr. Johnson, I promise to honor your trust and continue the work we started together. Champ, you've honored my trust every day for the past 40 years." The statewide project launched 2 years later, with 15 centers established across Florida. Tommy traveled the state training teams and implementing the methodology developed at the original Eleanor Miller Center. Michael, despite his age, joined the trips whenever possible, sharing his personal experience with new teams. "Everyone," Michael said during a training session in Tampa, "you're not just learning legal techniques, you're learning how to restore hope to people who've lost faith in justice." A young lawyer raised her hand. "Mr. Johnson, how do you stay motivated after all these years?" "Simple," Michael replied. "Every time we help an innocent person, we remember why this work matters. And we remember that Eleanor and Tommy never gave up on me when all seemed lost. And today, what motivates you now?" Michael looked at Tommy affectionately. "Today, I'm motivated knowing this work will continue through future generations, that Eleanor Michelle will grow up knowing she has a special mission in life." Eleanor Michelle, who had joined Michael and Tommy on the trip, waved at the crowd. At 11, she already showed interest in the family's work. "One day I'll work here too," she told the lawyer who had asked the question. "And we'll be waiting for you," the lawyer replied with a smile. On the drive back to Orlando, Michael reflected on the journey that had begun 42 years earlier, in that courtroom where he'd almost been wrongfully convicted. "Champ," he said to Tommy during the trip, "do you realize how far our story has spread beyond what we ever imagined?" "I do, Mr. Johnson. Grandma always said good deeds take on a life of their own, multiplying in ways we can't predict." "And Eleanor Michelle, do you think she'll really follow in our footsteps?" Tommy glanced at his daughter asleep in the back seat. "I think she's going to do even greater things than we did, Mr. Johnson. She's growing up with strong values and examples that show it's possible to make a difference. I'm sure you're right, champ." 3 years later, Michael began facing more serious health issues. At 88, he was diagnosed with a heart condition that required special care. Tommy was deeply concerned and insisted that Michael further reduce his activities. "Mr. Johnson, you need to take care of your health. You've already done more than enough for humanity." "Champ, I still have the energy to help people. I can't stop now." "Mr. Johnson, you don't have to stop. You can keep guiding others, just without the strain of traveling and long meetings." Michael eventually agreed. He began working only at the original center, receiving visits from people who wanted to meet him and hear his story. Eleanor Michelle, now 14, grew even closer to Michael. She spent every afternoon with him, listening to his stories and learning about the family's values. "Grandpa Michael," Eleanor Michelle said during one conversation, "what do you most want me to learn?" "Princess, I want you to learn that we all have the power to make a difference. That age, social status, money, none of that matters when it comes to doing what's right. But what if I'm afraid to help someone?" "Princess, courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right despite the fear. Your father was afraid when he stood up in that courtroom, but he did what he knew was right. And Grandma Eleanor, was she afraid?" "I'm sure she was, Princess. But she chose to act anyway because she knew it was the right thing to do." Eleanor Michelle reflected on her grandfather's words. "Grandpa, when I grow up, I'll be as brave as you all were." "Princess, you already are brave. I see it in how you treat people at the center, how you show kindness to those who are suffering." "Thank you, Grandpa. You teach me to be a better person every day." Michael was moved by his granddaughter's words. At 88, he knew he was leaving a solid legacy in the hands of the next generation. A year later, Michael decided to write his complete memoirs. He wanted to document his entire journey, from his early days as a police officer to the creation of the support centers. "Princess," Michael said to Eleanor Michelle, "do you want to help me write my biography?" "Of course, Grandpa. It's going to be amazing." Eleanor Michelle became Michael's official secretary, helping him organize his memories and typing the texts he dictated. "Grandpa," she said during a writing session, "your life sounds like a movie. So many things happened." "That's true, Princess, but the most important part isn't what happened to me. It's the people I met along the way." "Is that like Grandma Eleanor and Dad?" "Exactly. They taught me that our lives gain meaning when we help others." Michael's biography was completed 2 years later. The book, titled A Life Dedicated to Justice, Memoirs of Michael Johnson, became a national success, inspiring thousands. At the book launch ceremony, Michael, now 90, delivered what would be his final public speech. "Everyone," he said, his voice slightly weaker but still firm, "this book isn't about me. It's about all the people who taught me the true meaning of life. Eleanor Miller, Tommy, my family, and everyone we've helped over the years." The audience was moved as the man who had become a living legend gave his farewell speech. "I want to leave one final message," Michael continued. "Never underestimate the power you have to make a difference in someone's life. Sometimes a simple gesture, a word of support, or an act of courage can completely change a person's destiny." Tommy approached the stage holding Eleanor Michelle, now 16 years old. "Mr. Johnson," said Tommy, "you changed the lives of thousands of people, and you continue to change them through the example you set. Champ, it was you, all who changed my life. I just tried to repay the kindness I received." Eleanor Michelle took the microphone. "Grandpa Michael, I promise to continue the work you started. Our family will always fight for justice. Princess, I'm sure you'll do even greater things than we did." After the book launch, Michael decided to officially retire from public life. At 90 years old, he wanted to spend his remaining years in peace, surrounded by family. Tommy officially took over leadership of all the projects, but continued visiting Michael regularly for advice. "Mr. Johnson," Tommy said during one visit, "the state centers have already helped over 5,000 people. Our methodology is being studied for nationwide implementation. Champ, Eleanor would be proud to know her idea has spread across the country. And you, are you proud of what we've accomplished?" Michael held Tommy's hand. "Champ, I'm more than proud. I'm fulfilled. We turned a terrible experience into something good for thousands of people. Mr. Johnson, can I confess something?" "Of course, Champ." "Sometimes I still can't believe all this started with a 9-year-old boy shouting in a courtroom." Michael smiled. "Champ, the biggest changes always start with simple acts from courageous people." Eleanor Michelle, who had just turned 18, was preparing to start law school. She had chosen the same university her father attended. "Grandpa, Michael," she said, "when I graduate, I'll work at the centers too. Princess, you can choose any career you want. You don't have to feel obligated to follow in our footsteps. Grandpa, it's not an obligation. It's a calling. I grew up watching you help people, and that's what I want to do too." Michael was moved by his granddaughter's determination. "Princess, then get ready to study hard. Law is complex. It demands a lot of knowledge." "I'll study as much as I need to, Grandpa. I want to be as good as Dad." "I'm sure you'll be even better, Princess." 2 years later, when Michael turned 92, Eleanor Michelle was in her 3rd year of law school and already interning at the original Eleanor Miller Center. "Grandpa," she said during his birthday celebration, "yesterday I helped a family find evidence that could prove the father's innocence. It was the first time I actively worked on a case. And how did it feel, Princess?" "It was amazing, Grandpa. The feeling of giving hope to desperate people is indescribable." Michael smiled with satisfaction. "Princess, now you understand why we dedicated our lives to this work." "I understand completely, Grandpa, and I promise to honor our family's legacy." At the end of that year, Michael received a very special visit. It was Carly, the woman who had filmed his first meeting with Tommy, now a respected 60-year-old journalist. "Michael," Carly said, "I came here to thank you again. That video I took didn't just change your life, it changed mine too." "Carly, how so?" "Michael, after your story, I specialized in investigative journalism. I've helped exonerate dozens of people through my reporting. You inspired me to use my work to make a difference." Michael was moved. "Carly, do you see how good deeds multiply? Eleanor was right when she said helping one person ends up helping many others. And now I'm here with a proposal. I want to make a full documentary about your story, from the beginning to today, so future generations understand the importance of never giving up on the truth." Michael considered the proposal. "Monsieur, Carly, I accept, but on one condition. The documentary must show that the real heroine was Eleanor. She was the one who had the wisdom to recognize the injustice and the courage to act. Agreed, Michael. The documentary will honor Eleanor's memory and inspire many others. The documentary took 2 years to produce. Carly interviewed dozens of people who had been impacted by Michael's story, beneficiaries of the centers, lawyers who had learned from him, judges who changed their way of thinking because of his case. Tommy actively participated in the production, providing documents, photos, and testimonies. "Carly," Tommy said during an interview, "I want people to understand that my grandmother was an ordinary woman who did something extraordinary. She proved that we all have the power to change the world. And you, Tommy? How does it feel to be called a hero since childhood?" "Carly, I never felt like a hero. I always felt like part of a special family that learned early the importance of helping others." Eleanor Michelle, now a law graduate and officially working at the center, was also interviewed. "Eleanor Michelle," Carly asked, "what's it like carrying this family legacy?" "Carly, it's not a burden, it's a privilege. I grew up seeing examples of integrity, courage, and kindness. That shaped me as a person and as a professional." "And your plans for the future?" "To keep expanding the work my family started. We want no innocent person to feel helpless in the face of injustice." The documentary, Eleanor, Michael, and Tommy, their story of courage and truth, was released when Michael turned 94. Its nationwide broadcast had a major impact, inspiring the creation of new support centers across the country. Michael watched the premiere surrounded by his family: Catherine, now 88, Emily, 56 and a grandmother of 3, Tommy, 54, and Eleanor Michelle, 24. "Everyone," Michael said after watching the documentary, "Eleanor would be proud to see how our story has inspired so many people." "Dad," Emily said, "you've accomplished more in one lifetime than most people would in 10. Sweetheart, I just tried to repay the kindness I received. The real heroes were Eleanor and all of you who never gave up on me." Eleanor Michelle held her grandfather's hand. "Grandpa, you taught me that our measure of success shouldn't be what we achieve for ourselves, but what we do for others. Princess, you've learned life's most important lesson." 2 years later, Michael began showing signs of increasing frailty. At 96, his mind was sharp, but his body was clearly tired. Tommy and Eleanor Michelle spent most of their time with him, ensuring he had all the comfort and care he needed. "Michael," Tommy asked during a conversation, "do you have any regrets in life?" Michael thought carefully. "Champ, my only regret is not having met Eleanor sooner. She taught me so much in the few years we had together." "And what are you most proud of?" "I'm proud of being the father to the Tommy I helped raise, the grandfather to Eleanor Michelle who's following in our footsteps, and the friend of Eleanor, who changed my life forever." Eleanor Michelle leaned closer. "Grandpa, do you want me to keep telling your story to future generations?" "Princess, keep telling Eleanor's story. She's the real hero. I was just lucky enough to be saved by extraordinary people." 3 months later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Michael did not wake up. He passed away in his sleep at 96, surrounded by his family's love. Michael's funeral was one of the largest in Orlando's history. Thousands of people gathered to pay tribute to the man who had dedicated his life to helping others. Tommy delivered the eulogy at the funeral. Michael Johnson was much more than a police officer, much more than a founder of institutions. He was a living example that it's possible to turn suffering into hope, injustice into a fight for justice. "He taught me," Tommy continued, his voice breaking, "that our lives gain meaning when we live for something greater than ourselves. That true happiness lies in helping others find theirs." Eleanor Michelle also wanted to speak. "My grandfather Michael taught me that courage isn't about being fearless. It's about doing what's right despite the fear. He showed courage every day of his life, standing up to injustices and helping people. And now," Eleanor Michelle said, looking at the crowd, "our mission is to honor his memory by continuing the work he started. Because the fight for justice never ends." After the funeral, support centers across the country organized a special week in Michael's honor. For 7 days, educational activities on human rights and social justice were held. Eleanor Michelle officially took over as the national coordinator of the centers, working alongside Tommy. At 26, she became the youngest leader of a nationwide social project. "Dad," Eleanor Michelle said to Tommy, "I now fully understand the weight of responsibility we carry. Eleanor, always remember what Grandma Eleanor and Michael taught us. We don't do this out of obligation, but out of love for the people who need help." "You're right, Dad. It's love. That drives us, not duty." 2 years after Michael's passing, the support centers had expanded to every state in the US. The project that began with Eleanor's wisdom, Tommy's courage, and Michael's perseverance had become a national reality. Eleanor Michelle traveled across the country, opening new centers and training teams. At every opening, she shared her family's story, inspiring new generations to fight for justice. "Everyone," Eleanor Michelle said at an opening in Chicago, "our story proves that anyone at any age can make a difference. My great-grandmother Eleanor was 72 when she decided to help a stranger. My father was 9 when he found the courage to speak the truth in court. And you," she continued, "no matter your age or background, also have the power to change lives. Sometimes all it takes is a simple gesture, a word of support, an act of courage." After the speech, a young lawyer approached Eleanor Michelle. "Eleanor, your story inspired me to work in human rights. Can I join the project?" "Of course," Eleanor Michelle replied. "Just as Grandma Eleanor welcomed my father and Michael, we welcome everyone who wants to help." 5 years later, Eleanor Michelle received news that moved her deeply. The Support Center project had gained international attention, and she was invited to present it at a human rights conference. "Dad," she said to Tommy, "remember how Grandpa Michael always said our story was local? Now it's inspiring people in other countries." Eleanor, Grandma. "Eleanor was right when she said good deeds know no borders. They spread where they're needed." "Dad, do you think Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa Michael would be proud?" Tommy smiled. "Eleanor, I'm certain they are. Not just because of the project's success, but because of the kind, principled person you've become." At the international conference, Eleanor Michelle presented the American methodology for supporting victims of injustice. "Your presentation was so impactful that several countries requested consulting to implement similar projects." "Ladies and gentlemen," said Eleanor Michelle in her presentation, "our story began over 40 years ago when a wise woman decided she could not remain silent in the face of injustice. Today, that decision has grown into a national network that has helped more than 50,000 people. But the most important thing," Eleanor continued, "isn't the numbers, it's the lesson we learned, that all of us, regardless of age, social standing, or resources, have the power to make a difference in someone's life." After the conference, Eleanor Michelle received offers to work internationally, but she declined them all. "My place is in the United States," she told Tommy. "This is where our family planted its roots, and this is where I will continue honoring Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa Michael's legacy." 10 years later, when Eleanor Michelle turned 38, she received a special visit. An elderly woman, around 80 years old, accompanied by a young man in his early 20s. "Are you Eleanor Michelle?" the woman asked. "I'm Mary Grace, and this is my grandson Charles. We came here to thank you." "Thank me for what?" Eleanor Michelle asked curiously. 15 years ago, when my son was wrongly accused of a crime, you helped us. You proved his innocence. Now my grandson Charles just graduated from law school and wants to work helping people the way you helped us." Eleanor Michelle was moved. "Mrs. Mary Grace, Charles, it's an honor to meet you. This is exactly the reaction my great-grandmother Eleanor hoped for, that the people we helped would pass on the kindness they received." "Charles," Eleanor Michelle said, turning to the young man, "are you ready to dedicate your life to helping people who have lost hope?" "I am," Charles replied with determination. "Your family taught me, through my own family's story, that it's always worth fighting for the truth." Eleanor Michelle smiled. "Then welcome to our family, Charles. We'll teach you everything we've learned over these 45 years. Charles became one of the most dedicated lawyers at the centers, inspired by his own family's story and the example of Eleanor Michelle's family. When Eleanor Michelle turned 40, she decided to write a book telling the full story of her family, from Eleanor to Michael, through Tommy, and up to her. The book, titled 4 generations of courage, the story of the family that changed justice. In America, became a publishing phenomenon, selling over 1 million copies. "Dad," Eleanor Michelle said to Tommy during the book launch, "we've honored Grandma Eleanor and Grandpa Michael's memory." "Eleanor, you didn't just honor their memory. You surpassed all the expectations they had for future generations. Dad, everything I am I learned from the 3 of you. Grandma Eleanor, Grandpa Michael, and you." Tommy, now 68, was moved. "Eleanor, you've become an even greater leader than I ever was. Your great-grandmother would be proud." At the end of the book launch, Eleanor Michelle gave a speech that perfectly captured her family's legacy. "Everyone," she said, "our story proves that we don't have to be special people to do special things. My great-grandmother was a retired civil servant. My father was a 9-year-old boy. My adoptive grandfather was an ordinary police officer. I'm just a lawyer." "But we all had one thing in common," Eleanor continued, "the belief that doing what's right is worth any sacrifice. That helping others is the truest way to find meaning in life. And now," Eleanor Michelle concluded, "I pass this mission on to all of you, so that each of you, in your own field, in your community, can make a difference in someone's life. Because justice isn't just the responsibility of judges and lawyers, it's the responsibility of all of us." The audience rose in a heartfelt standing ovation. The story that had begun 45 years earlier with a boy shouting in a courtroom had become a national inspiration. 5 years later, when Eleanor Michelle turned 45, she was invited to take a position at the Department of Justice, coordinating public policies to support victims of judicial errors. "Dad," Eleanor Michelle said to Tommy, "accepting this position means our methodology will become official public policy. We'll be able to help people on an even larger scale." "Eleanor, accept the invitation. It's the natural culmination of everything we've built." "But Dad, this means stepping away from the centers we created." "Eleanor, you're not stepping away. You're taking our work to an even higher level. Grandma Eleanor would be proud." Eleanor Michelle accepted the invitation and became the National Secretary for Support of Victims of Judicial Errors, the first position of its kind in the history of the United States. At her swearing-in, she gave an emotional speech. "Ladies and gentlemen," Eleanor Michelle said, 50 years ago, a wise woman named Eleanor Miller decided she couldn't stay silent in the face of injustice. Today, her decision becomes national public policy. I take this position," Eleanor continued, "with the responsibility to honor not only her memory, but the memory of everyone who fought to bring us here. My grandfather, Michael Johnson, my father, Tommy, and thousands of people who dedicated their lives to fighting for justice." After the swearing-in ceremony, Tommy approached Eleanor Michelle. "Eleanor, you fulfilled a dream even Grandma Eleanor didn't dare to dream. You turned a local story into national change. Dad, that was only possible because you taught me we should never give up on our ideals, no matter how difficult the path." 2 years later, well established in her new role, Eleanor Michelle received a visit that moved her deeply. A delegation of young law students had formed a study group based on her family's history. "Dr. Eleanor," said the group's leader, "we've studied your family's story and decided to dedicate our academic training to following in your footsteps." "How wonderful," Eleanor Michelle replied. "How many of you are there?" "We're 50 students from 10 different universities, all inspired by the story of Mrs. Eleanor, your father Tommy, and your grandfather Michael." Eleanor Michelle was moved. "You represent exactly what my great-grandmother Eleanor hoped for, that our story would inspire new generations to fight for justice." "Dr. Eleanor," one student asked, "what advice would you give to young people who want to make a difference?" "The same advice my great-grandmother would give," Eleanor Michelle answered. "Never underestimate the power you have to change the world. Sometimes a simple gesture, a word of support, or an act of courage can completely transform someone's life." The students left the meeting inspired and determined to dedicate their careers to defending the wrongfully accused. 3 years later, when Eleanor Michelle turned 50, she received the highest honor of her career. She was nominated for the National Order of Merit, the country's highest civilian decoration. At the award ceremony, the president gave an emotional speech. Eleanor Michelle Johnson represents the best of America, the president said, a woman who turned a personal story of injustice into hope for millions of Americans. Your family, the president continued, taught us that justice isn't just a technical or legal matter. It's a human issue, requiring courage, perseverance, and above all, love for others. Eleanor Michelle received the award with deep emotion, thinking of her great-grandmother Eleanor, who had planted the seed that was now being recognized nationally. Mr. President, Eleanor Michelle said in her acceptance speech, I accept this honor not just in my name, but in the name of all who have dedicated their lives to fighting for justice, especially in the name of Eleanor Miller, who taught me that we must never stay silent in the face of injustice. After the ceremony, Tommy, now 78, embraced his daughter with pride. Eleanor, your great-grandmother and Michael would be immensely proud. You've taken their legacy to heights they never imagined. Dad, all of this was only possible because you taught me the right values from a young age. Eleanor, you've surpassed all of us. You became a national leader, yet kept the humility and dedication you learned from your family. That evening, Eleanor Michelle returned home and spent hours looking through family photo albums, pictures of Eleanor, Michael, Tommy as a child, and special family moments. Grandma Eleanor, she murmured, gazing at a photo of her great-grandmother. We did it. Your decision to help a stranger turned into a national change. Thank you for teaching me that we all have the power to make a difference. The next day, Eleanor Michelle announced the creation of a national human rights education program based on her family's story. The program would be implemented in all public schools across the country. Everyone, she said in the program's announcement, our story must be told, so children learn early that we all have a social responsibility, that we can all make a difference. The program was a tremendous success. Millions of children nationwide learned the story of Eleanor, Michael, Tommy, and Eleanor Michelle, inspiring them to seek justice in their own communities. 5 years later, when Eleanor Michelle turned 55, she decided it was time to retire from public life and devote herself to family. Tommy, now 83, needed more care, and she wanted to spend more time with him. Dad, Eleanor. Michelle said, it's time for me to take care of you just as you took care of me. Eleanor, you don't have to give up your career for my sake. Dad, my career is already established. Now I want to focus on what's most important, our family. Eleanor Michelle spent her final years in public life organizing the transition of her projects to others. She made sure all programs would continue running without her. At her retirement ceremony, she gave a moving farewell speech. Everyone, Eleanor Michelle said, my mission in public life is complete. We've turned a personal story of injustice into public policies that protect millions of Americans, but I want to make one thing clear. The fight for justice never ends. Each generation must take up this responsibility and adapt the struggle to the needs of their time. And now, she concluded, I pass the baton to the next generations, confident they will continue honoring the legacy my great-grandmother Eleanor began over 60 years ago. 3 years later, Tommy passed away peacefully at 86, surrounded by the love of Eleanor Michelle and their entire family. His funeral was a celebration of the life of a man who had turned a childhood act of courage into a lifelong mission. Tommy Johnson, Eleanor Michelle said at the funeral, was so much more than my father. He was my mentor, my example of courage and integrity. He taught me that true greatness lies in helping others, not in seeking personal recognition. After the funeral, Eleanor Michelle decided to write one final book, the complete biography of Tommy, recounting his transformation from a courageous boy into a national leader. The book, Tommy, the Boy Who Changed Justice in America, became a bestseller and was adopted as required reading in schools across the country. Eleanor Michelle spent her final years in peace, knowing she had fully honored her family's legacy. She passed away at 85, leaving behind a nationwide network of support centers, established public policies, and thousands of people inspired by her story. At her funeral, thousands gathered to pay tribute to the woman who had dedicated her life to honoring the memory of her great-grandmother Eleanor. The family's legacy lived on through the institutions they had built, the books they had written, the public policies they had established, and most of all, the values they had passed down to thousands of people. The story that began with a wise woman choosing to help a stranger continued with a child having the courage to speak the truth, flourished with a man devoting his life to repaying the kindness he had received, and culminated with a woman turning it all into national change. And even decades later, when no original family members remained, the story of Eleanor, Michael, Tommy, and Eleanor Michelle continued to inspire new generations to fight for justice, help others, and never stay silent in the face of injustice. Because some stories transcend their origins and become part of a people's soul. And the story of the family that began its journey in a courtroom in Orlando had become just that, an eternal inspiration for all who believe that truth always prevails, and that every one of us has the power to make a difference. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of the story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave a heartfelt comment below. Do you think Eleanor Michelle made the right choice in dedicating her life to justice? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like this video and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.